Hey, everybody,
Uh,
come on in. The water is
we're
warm.
we're
Jump
much
on
more
in.
kind and hospitable than our fearless leader in this country.
Yes, yes. Well, he is. I wouldn't call him fearless. I call him very fearful. In fact,
That's
he
true.
he backed down, as Trump would say, like a dog on the Greenland thing, because which, by the way, was completely to be expected. Let's just mention really quickly. Trump gives this rambling, incoherent speech in Davos, which is pretty much all he does now is give rambling, incoherent speeches. And he basically
No,
said,
that's not fair. He also gives rambling, incoherent press conferences.
"That's true. That is fair. It's a fair point. Thank you for that. Thank you for that addendum." And he basically says we're not going to use military force on Greenland. He hopes that the Europeans will acquiesce. Of course, they're not going to. Or the Danes are not going to acquiesce on this. And he was never going to use military force. And one of the reasons why I say this is that I was writing something recently in Venezuela, and one of the things that's, I think, important to understand about the Venezuela mission, which, by the way, was 2 weeks ago and has totally been forgotten, was that this was a Rubio operation, right? So a year ago, Trump sent Rick Grinnell to Venezuela to pursue a policy of normalization with Maduro. That was the policy, at least initially. And I mean, Trump wanted to get a deal with Maduro. And then I think Rubio got into his ear and said, no, 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 we should take this guy out. And then you lead to sort of escalation and finally Maduro is captured. But there's the difference between Venezuela and now. And by the way, just for the record, like Trump didn't want to do the Venezuela thing. He had to be talked into it by Rubio. There is nobody in the White House talking into Trump's ear and saying, we need to go into Greenland. If anything, the exact opposite. Nobody thinks this is a good idea. Nobody wants to do this. And I mean, maybe Steve Miller, but I seriously doubt even he's wasting his time on this stuff. So with no one whispering in Trump's ear to do Greenland, I just think it was never likely to happen.
Well, the one thing I would add with Trump, and I was just reading, Stephanie McCroman had a great profile of Pam Bondi in the Atlantic yesterday, and spoiler, Bondi has absolutely no principles whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm
But
shocked. I'm shocked to hear that.
I know that shocks you, but
Yeah,
one thing you see with all these people is they all spend all their time currying Trump's favor and trying to like perform like who could be the loudest, biggest asshole, basically.
basically. Yeah,
And so what worries me with stuff like this is that none of them actually care about this, none of them actually believe it. But if they think the boss believes it, then
right.
they're going to be out there, like Basent acting like idiots. Um, and then there's like a feedback loop where he then it's like, oh, they think it's a good idea kind of thing. But
Yeah,
yeah, I don't think anyone is all that invested in it. And I actually think it's the one area where there might be some congressional pushback.
I agree. I agree.
They, there was a Codel that went to Denmark last week, and now Tom Tillis is obviously retiring, so he has slightly more balls than the average Republican in Congress, slightly.
Still teeny
Um,
balls, but they're slightly
but
larger.
yeah, basically. But he was saying that he was shocked by how much vitriol they encountered. And he said they were playing American Idiot on the radio, and he was correct that it's a good song.
It's a good song.
But you don't usually just play 20-year-old songs on the radio without a purpose like that. And it's clear that pretty much all of Europe hates us now. And so I do think that some of the old, McConnell faction of the GOP would actually rise up a little bit if they thought there was any possibility of military action. But I do think the dumb fuck prize, that is right, Gail. That
Yeah,
is a good idea for
Gail
him.
Fonda in the comments, she is on fire this morning, this afternoon. She says the Nobel Prize. There's the dumb fuck prize, which I don't know that actually is a prize. Maybe it should be. I think Gail
We could
is
launch
onto a
that.
good idea.
The two bearded Jews present the dumb fuck
The dumb
prize.
fuck prize, yeah. I mean, I don't even know that I would say. I think dumb fuck is describing Trump is probably inadequate to describe who he is. I mean, you know my whole theory on Trump. I mean, he's just mentally ill, and he's just profoundly, profoundly broken person. And I mean, he's an idiot, obviously, and he is a terrible president and a bad person, but he's a broken person. And as you point out, he surrounded himself with people who are complicit in his mania. I mean,
Yeah.
the thing that I'm struck by is the letter he sent to the Norwegian prime minister. I mean, look, it's hard to shock me at this point, but that was like stunning in how absurd of a document that was to basically say that to blame Norway for not getting Nobel Peace Prize and to say that he's getting tougher on Greenland because of it. I mean, talk about playing into the hands of like Democrats on this one. It's just it's also a moment that just really speaks to his mental decline. I mean, this is
There
just not
was
something a normal person should be saying.
there was something I was reading, and I don't remember where I saw it, that said that like most of our insulin and a couple of other things come from Denmark or something like that,
Really. And
or
most
maybe
of our clogs, most of our clogs.
I think it might not have even been Denmark, but somewhere that he put a tariff on because of this was like where we're getting most of our insulin and a couple of other like really necessary medical things, and it's just like he can't get out of his own way at
No,
all.
no.
And there's no seemingly no realization as to how bad things are playing. I mean the ice stuff especially. And you pointed to the letter. The thing that really struck me is the how deranged he is. He said he's done something of an about face on the murder in Minneapolis because he found out that her father was a Trump fan.
That Renega's father was a Trump fan.
Yeah,
Yeah, and he
yeah,
was like, I hope he still likes me. Yeah,
right, right.
focus on the important issues there, Donald. Yeah,
I just was like, he is the biggest narcissist I've ever seen.
it's insane.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. It never ceases to amaze. And as someone who's had a lot of experience with narcissists, I mean, not a lot, but a limited, but let's say highly concentrated. They are very tough people to be around. They lie, they mislead, they don't take responsibility, they gaslight. It's hard, but he takes this to a level that is extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, it really, really, truly is that everything is about him. Everything, literally. If DC gets a blizzard this weekend, it'll be about
It's
him.
about him. Yeah, he's
He'll
a
he'll
very
be at Mar-a-Lago though and avoid the snow. By the way, before we get to anything else, make sure you're hitting that like button down there so more
yes.
people can benefit from our great wit.
There you go.
Um,
Thank you.
that
That's right.
we have here. And there's actually a topic. I told Michael I want to ask him about a topic that I haven't heard anybody discuss, but and also because we need
Well,
something positive.
actually, before you do that, I want to pick up on a point you just raised. I thought it was really, really worthwhile. So before
Okay.
you jump into that, you mentioned about how Trump doesn't do things that are uh, popular. I wrote a piece about this, sort of like I guess sort of the year anniversary about what I called Donald Trump's weird presidency. And what is really strange was what you just said. You know, every policy that he has pursued has is unpopular, and he rather than like trimming his sails, he's doubled down on them. Right on the tariffs, very unpopular. But what does he do? He basically threatens tariffs over Greenland. So it's like, I'm going to use this very unpopular policy in support of an even more unpopular policy, which is the seizure of Greenland. And just for it's clear, the Greenland thing, maybe 20% support right now to even acquire it, military acquisition, even less support. So very unpopular. On the mass deportation, I made this point last week, but I think it's really worth pointing out. Had Trump pursued a strategy of closing the border and arresting people who committed violent crimes, I think he'd probably be getting, good marks in immigration. Instead, he's underwater in immigration because he has pursued this with a zealotry that has turned off a lot of Americans. And so I just think what's interesting about this is that I get that he's a lame duck, and so he's not running for reelection, doesn't care about his popularity as much. But usually in the first 2 years of a second term, a president does care, and they care because they don't want to lose Congress. And what's even more shocking is he has talked about how fearful he is of losing the House
Yeah.
because he's fearful of getting impeached again. And yet, of course, he's incapable of seeing how his own behavior causes the problem with the
Well,
Republican Party. But this
but
is what's interesting. He is pursuing policies that are deeply unpopular, period.
and
And it's very strange.
I also think that there's a certain not fear, but like an unwillingness to actually overrule Stephen Miller. Because you keep looking at these images in Minnesota. And first of all, I've been saying this for a while. Minnesota is a state where if Democrats get a trifecta, and you have to think this ICE stuff is heading in that direction. And by the way, it might have been a state where they had an issue because of the Tim Walz stuff and the
Yeah.
scandal. It had they not gone out and done this awful, awful stuff where even the police chief is talking about one of his own officers being beaten up by ICE. and mistreated by ICE. I mean, just really terrible stuff. Minnesota's a state where if Democrats get a trifecta, they can redraw the House map, right? That's
Right.
2 or 3 seats in 2028, at a time when Democrats actually are going to have fewer opportunities to do that than you might expect, because of arcane laws in some of these places, or the procedural minutia of things. And I have to imagine these images, yes, we're seeing them around the world, but especially in other places in the Midwest where, similar demographically, where people kind of see their own communities. Wisconsin's another state that Democrats could get a trifecta, and could
Yep.
easily redraw a map. Like this is all political downside for him.
Yeah.
Um, and, apparently he's expressed some discomfort with some of the images and things, but like it's unbelievable to me that he hasn't realized what a toxic thing this is. But both with Latino and Hispanic voters, with the community in Minnesota,
Yeah.
it really is something where it there's no upside, there's all downside for him.
I'm actually curious. You made an interesting question about what the effect in Minnesota politically. I hadn't thought about that. It's a really good point, but I do wonder, like, do Minnesota Republicans? There must be, as there is in like pretty much every state. I feel like a rural-urban divide of people who outside of Minnesota are not big fans of the libs in Minneapolis. I just wonder how this is. I'm wondering how Minnesota Republicans are handling this.
And I also wonder how it's being handled. Like the Iron Range has swung really hard against the Democrats, over the last 10, 20 years. And I wonder in some of those places up by like Duluth and stuff, which I think is the one Democratic bastion still up there, whether it's pushed people a little bit away. But even out, the district that Walls represented, I think, um, is like south of the Twin Cities, and it's like an exurban, got a lot of exurban area in it.
Yeah.
But you start to wonder about some of these things and where those are going. Um, and I also think about the fact that, Democrats can redraw the House map. They can get rid of Tom Emmer. And that's an embarrassment to Republicans to have one of their
Sure.
own leaders
Sure.
eliminated. And I just, I look at the rest of the Midwest, and I can't imagine this is going well. I mean, if I were Trump, I certainly would not be prioritizing anything that could potentially be a competitive state for ICE action. Um, because I just don't think these agents clearly cannot restrain
Well,
themselves.
clearly they chose Minnesota because they wanted to raise the profile of the childcare
Right,
scandal
right,
issue
right.
and also bash Somali Americans. So that was part of it as well. But
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's an odd choice, and you're right. There is a danger, but of course, Trump doesn't give a shit. He doesn't care about what happens to the Republican Party. He just cares
No,
about
but
how it
as you
affects
say,
him.
he cares about not getting impeached. He you would think he would care about making the Senate competitive.
Look,
Um,
and we're going to talk more about
but
this later. But on Louisiana, he just endorsed Bill Cassidy's opponent in a primary. Assuming Cassidy loses, and I think he probably will lose, you're going to basically have a pissed off Republican senator in the Senate for the next, I don't know,
not not
eight or
just
9 months.
not just a pissed off senator, a pissed off committee chairman.
Yeah, I mean it's
And you already
pretty
see Tom
crazy.
Tillis blocking nominees, and taking advantage of the fact that the committees are narrowly divided, where he can, basically swing a vote on the committee. But Cassie's the chair of the health committee. Apparently, Thune talked to Trump on Friday and said to him, "Look, you don't want to endorse against him because you just proposed this healthcare stuff, Mr.
Right,
President, and it's got to go through his committee."
right.
It's a May primary. And look, Lynn, we're not saying that there's sympathy for Cassidy. We're saying this is a strategic blunder because Cassidy is going to still have power from May to December, and
Yeah.
be dangerous to Trump's agenda. And with each of these guys that he pisses off, he whittles away, makes it a little bit harder to do what he wants to do in the Senate. And then, no, none of them, that they're all right wingers. Let's be clear, there are no like moderates left. That's why McConnell's voted for most of what he's done this year. That's why Tillis still votes for most of it. But with each one of these people, they are harder to strong arm than the others. They are more inclined to say no. Especially somebody like Cassie, if he feels scorned, there's a lot of chicanery that one can get into as a Senate committee chairman
I mean,
to
don't
make
forget Bev.
life miserable.
Bill Cassidy did vote to convict Trump in his second impeachment. Just keep that
Right.
in
Well,
mind.
that's what this is all about.
Of
And
course,
we could talk about more later. The other thing to remember with Trump is that it's all transactional, and
it's
he
all
is not
transactional.
actually a partisan in the classic sense. He met with Schumer last week, about the Gateway Tunnel and other things. And that's first of all because he's a New Yorker and he cares about New York stuff, but also because he's a completely transactional animal. And I will tell you, all these Republicans dying for Trump and putting their political careers, lighting them on fire. If Democrats ever get into his ear, he's going to do all these things that you hate.
Look,
And
I'm just gonna say for the record that look, one thing I've been surprised by. We're 3 weeks into Zoran Mondani's mayoralty. Does he pronounce it?
that's
Yeah.
Trump's texting BFF,
Right,
Zoran
and
Montani.
right, so they've yet to send ICE up here. He's yet to really fuck with New York City, which I'm surprised by, and I suspect it might be because Mamdani is texting with him and probably talking him off the ledge. I want to mention one thing. One of the readers, Maxine Cohen, is a longtime subscriber to Truth and Consequences. She says that he's definitely
Is that your
suffering.
mom, Michael? You said
It's not my
Cohen.
mom.
No,
It's
no.
not my mom. It's different Cohen. Different Cohen. Says he is. She might be on here, but that's not my mother. He's definitely suffering from cognitive decline. Thinking of Trump, and his administration is running the show, not him. So I'll say for the record, I made this argument in April. I think it was about the Arbrego Garcia case. That basically this was Stephen Miller who's clearly running things and not Trump, and Trump doesn't even know what's going on in his own administration. So just a reminder that you should subscribe to Truth and Consequences if you haven't already, because you can read about this stuff ahead of time, and you would have known back in April that Donald Trump wasn't actually running the administration. So one more reason to subscribe to Truth and Consequences, and also, of
Look,
course, subscribe to The World According to Brian.
see,
Yes,
we provide a nice compliment. People can come and watch my beautiful mug here for 20 minutes at a pop, and they can go read your columns.
there you go.
And
There you
we
go.
cover them in all situations. You have video, you have columns, you can get it all.
You get it all. You get
So,
it all. So somebody also asked, Lynn Mustard said, "Do you think Dem leaders should be speaking out more?" I don't know what else Dem leaders can say at this point. I mean, I think I was struck by something that Ruben Gallego said. If I can pull this up, Gallego has been absolutely lacerating Trump recently, and he said something to the extent of like he's not just rightly calls him an idiot, which is sort of not dissimilar from what Gavin Newsom says. But let me see if I can find the tweet that what Gallego said. It was it was pretty striking. Hold on. He said, hold that thought. Where is this? Oh, uh, he said, oh, actually, yeah, he really shit all over Carrie Lake. He said the one thing you don't know how to do is beat me in an election when she was attacking him. He loves going after her, which I really do appreciate. Um, I can't find it. But basically, Gallego has been incredibly, really harsh on Trump. And I do think there's like I think there's a real logic to this. I think that it actually, he said Trump is playing, he said, stop pretending Trump is playing some genius long game. He's not. He's a deeply insecure idiot, and he'll gladly blow up the world order and screw over the entire country if it makes him feel big for 5 minutes. I couldn't agree more, by the way. That's exactly a description of Trump. But I just think it's interesting that Gallego, who, look, let's face it, he's running for president. He's certainly putting his toe in the water. Uh, he's determined. I mean, look, this is, I guess, sort of the Newsom playbook. He's determined that this is the way to
well,
get attention, is to
well,
basically to belittle Trump this way.
what's interesting about Gallego, and I don't actually think he's going to run largely because he has very little children. And
Yeah,
I think that personally it'll be better time for him to wait. But Gallego is sort of trying to fuse the lanes. You have the electability lane that Andy Bashir, Jonathan Martin just did a whole profile of Andy Bashir on this, where you have red state and purple state Democrats. Bashir, Josh Shapiro, Mark Kelly, on the whole, we're electable and we can win in these places that you need to win kind of lane. And then you have the Newsom, like, I'm the fighter lane. And that
yeah,
doesn't even get us to the leftist lane. But what Gallego is trying to do is both be the fighter and say, hey, guys, I was elected in Arizona even while Trump was on the ballot. And you need to win Arizona. And, look at me. I'm the swing state guy who can throw a punch. And I think that may be a way to try to kind of bridge those lanes a little bit, um, which is interesting because I still think that at the end of the day, there are too many good red and purple state Democrats at this point for anybody else to win the nomination. I think that,
Mm.
the party craves winning too much, and we're only 1 year in. We're talking 3 years from now that, of Trump doing more awful things. So I think it's going to be hard to beat that, hey, look, I won this place, we must win thing. But who comes out of that lane is more interesting. And
Mm.
who really, do they coalesce around someone? How does it go? Who even runs? Because you have like half dozen or more Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, or red state folks who have a legitimate case as, hey, we are electable. And that's powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting. We don't talk much about 2020, and I have to say I don't like talking about 2020 this early.
I
Um,
hate it even more than you do.
I
That's
think
why
it's
we
sort of
don't.
pointless. The only
Yeah.
thing I'll say, the only thing I'll put out there is that I do think that there's like there's two main lanes, as you sort of pointed out here. I mean, one is the Gavin Newsom kind of let's attack and belittle Trump, and then there's kind of like the technocratic lane, which is like somebody like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. I guess you could say Bashir somewhat in Kentucky. Um, but then there's a third factor, which I think people are not talking about enough, which is that Kamala Harris, she could run again. And if she runs again, I do think she's likely to win the nomination. I would probably put my
Oh,
money on her.
no.
Okay,
Absolutely not.
and let me say why I say that. I just think that she has the name recognition. She would be able to probably cultivate support with black voters much more effectively than Newsom or Shapiro. And my whole theory on this is that black voters pick the nominee. They have the last several competitive cycles. They didn't, and usually it's South Carolina that matters the most. And if you can lay out a strategy or lay out a pathway in which Shapiro or Newsom can beat her in South Carolina, fine. But I tend to think she would do well there. Now, I'm not saying she's going to run. I don't know if she's going to run. I mean, there are. I was struck by the back and forth with her and Shapiro, in which Shapiro basically you know, claimed that Harris's staff asked him if he was a double agent for Israel, which although apparently they asked the question to Tim Walz as well. But the thing with that was that he was responding in some ways to Harris kind of crapping all over him, which you only really do that if you're thinking of running for president, I think. So I do think she's certainly thinking about it. I mean, by the
Uh,
way, Lynn, I agree. I think that, my sort of theory of 2016 and 2024 of why Democrats lost is because they nominated a woman, which I hate to say that because I'd like to see a female president, but I think we live in a sexist country. And I think there was a tax put on Democrats for nominating women, and that cost them in 16 and 24. I don't think she should be the nominee just because I think that a woman, you cannot guarantee that a woman can. I think it's hard for women to win the presidency, period. Even in 28, which I think will be a good year for Democrats. So you're better off nominating a man. But I'm just saying if she runs, she's a very difficult candidate to beat. That's all I'm saying.
I first of all don't think she's going to run because I don't think she can win. And I don't think she's particularly good at politics, and I think she sort of gets this. The other reason you put some of that stuff in your book though is to sell books, and I think that was part of what she's doing.
Maybe.
But I mean, I think you speak to her strongest point, which is the one lane that there isn't really a front runner in is the African American lane, and that is the base of the party, especially African American women. And whether it's South Carolina or Georgia or North Carolina, you're going to have a state with a strong percentage of black voters early in the primary calendar. And so there is that for her. But here's the thing. I started thinking about it. If you go back in history, the last loser to get a second shot the next time around, I know somebody on Twitter was yelling at me yesterday about Trump, but Trump's a former president, so that's a slightly different category. We're talking about Adlai Stevenson in the 1950s for a party to say, "Hey, you lost the last time. Let's turn around and do this again." And he lost again. I just think that people are going to be able to cast doubt about um, her ability to win and say, look, you had your chance. Bashir was leaning in this profile to Nixon wasn't consecutive elections. Sorry, I
Yeah.
wasn't clear there. Nixon there were 64 in the middle. I'm not saying Kamala Harris's career is definitely over. Nixon is proof that there is no such thing. But I'm talking about you run and then you turn around and run again the next cycle. The party nominates you again. And I think that, you're going to have a lot of people attacking her as, hey, you were easily branded as a coastal liberal. And the way to win things back in this country is not through coastal
Look,
liberalism.
you're making the argument that you and I agree with, but I'm just saying that I don't know if that's going to play among voters. Look, she's well known. She can raise money. She almost certainly will do better with black voters than anybody else who's being considered. I'm not saying she's going to win, but I am saying that if she gets in the race, she'd be very difficult to beat, and she would immediately become the front runner because she is the former nominee of the party and she was the former
Right.
vice president.
But the other thing, their side of that is, when does the early front runner ever win? At least not without. Sometimes they win, but they win after a long time in the doldrums. John McCain's campaign
Wasn't
falling
Biden
apart.
wasn't Biden the early front runner?
Right. Well, I was about to say they have to go through like their death and then their resurrection, so to speak. Um, because I mean, we saw it with Biden, we saw it with McCain. I mean, I don't like talking about this stuff now for the simple reason that so much is going to change.
Yeah.
We don't know who's going to run. Even people who right now are probably 90-10 in their own minds that they're running. You don't know what's going to change. No one's going to declare for another year now, almost. And you don't know what's
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
change over that year, just in their own personal circumstances. And some people will run and some people won't because something changes. Some people will decide to wait another cycle. I just thought that Harris's unwillingness to run for California governor suggests that she understands her own weakness and her own limitations,
Well,
and
or it
that
could mean that she's preparing to run for president again.
it could, but I
You know.
kind of think the easiest way for her to ever get into the White House would be as governor. I mean, the thing is, she's just not a very good politician. That's the
So,
other thing.
but let me. You know what? I don't want to spend all the time talking about Kamala Harris, but I will say one thing. I'm going to push back a little bit. Like there is now, because she lost. This is always the way it goes. Democrats shit all over the candidate who loses. You know, at the time, people did argue that she was running a good campaign, and she did run a good campaign. And I always go with this point that Harris, in places where she campaigned the most aggressively, the swing states, she overperformed. And she was in many ways punished because of this sort of anti-incumbent mood of the country. But she ran a much better race than people give her credit for. And I question her political instincts. I questioned them before she got in the race. Is why I continue to think that Biden was a better bet than her. I think she deserves a little more credit than she's received. She did run a good campaign. I don't think any Democrat could have won. And I think Democrats have this tendency to just, if somebody loses, to basically like excise them. And in some cases that's deserved. Like Dukakis ran a bad campaign. He deserved, to lose. Gore ran a terrible campaign. John Kerry did not run a bad campaign. Hillary Clinton actually ran a relatively good campaign. She just got really unlucky. But I think that with Harris, look, we should table this. But all I'm saying is that if she runs, she has a lot of support in the party and she will be a formidable candidate. I don't think she's going to run, but that is not a strongly held view on my part. She could run. And if she does, it's going to make for a very, very messy primary.
I
However, can I go? Can I digress? Okay, go ahead. Sorry, then I got one more.
I would just say that my assessment of her as a bad politician, or as an unnatural, not particularly good politician, is less about 2024 and more about the primary in 2019. I think she got better. I think she was better in 2024, but I certainly think that some of these other people have much greater political skill, have won harder races.
Well, but hold on a
Um,
second. Hold on a second. She has run a presidential campaign. Okay. Josh Shapiro has not. Gavin Newsom has not. It is often the case that a president runs once, loses, and then runs again, and they fix the mistakes they made the first time. You could argue that about Hillary Clinton in 2016, although she lost, obviously. I mean, Nixon's an example of this. Most candidates run more than
Well,
once.
at least
Not
winning a
most.
primary. A lot of these people lose a primary and then come back. Mitt Romney lost one.
Right.
McCain lost one.
Look, Reagan lost in
Bob
76 to
Dole.
Ford. He runs again
Yep.
in 80 and he wins. Bush run in 80. He lost. He ran again in 88. He won. Obviously, he's VP. Obama is sort of the exception to the rule as somebody who never ran before, jumps in the race and
Clinton.
wins. Same with Trump. Clinton, too, actually.
Clinton,
Clinton, you're
Trump,
right. Clinton's.
Obama,
Although, I mean,
W.
look,
Bush.
I love Bill Clinton. I worked for the guy, but let's be honest with you. My dog Baxter probably could have won that election against George H.W. Bush. I mean, let's be very honest about it.
That's cruel.
And if
But
like any Democrat worth their muster had run against him in the primaries, he would not have been the president that year. He
the
would have lost it.
last, with the exception of Trump 2 now, The last rerun candidate who won would have been Reagan because he lost in 76 and won
No,
in
Bush.
80.
Bush in 88.
That's true. I got yeah, Bush in 88 because Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, Trump were all first timers. I guess Biden. Although
Yeah,
there were
Biden.
but
Biden.
Biden's interesting in that he ran in 88, '08, and then 20. Like there were huge gaps in there. Um,
Yeah.
but
But
I
Hillary
mean,
ran in '08, then she ran in 16. I mean,
I
I
also
mean,
think that part of why this is so premature is that you're going to have 20 people running.
true.
You're gonna have the kinds of fields that you never had before in terms of that you can't even fit them all in one debate stage. And look, I think Harris will have gotten better. I'm just saying, like, you look at Gallegos, we'll finish where we started the conversation. Ruben Gallego has won a really hard race, a United States Senate race in a swing state in a year that his nominee was losing at the top of the ticket. Kamala Harris has never won a tough election in her life. Never. Never. Not a single one. She won a Senate race in a blue state, an attorney general's race in a blue state.
I
She
mean,
flamed out in 2019.
either had Barack Obama, either had Donald Trump.
No,
I mean, I don't.
but Barack Obama and Donald Trump had never lost either like that.
That's true.
Obama had
No, no,
lost one
Obama
house.
lost.
Yeah, he lost
He
to
lost the
Bobby
House
Rush.
race. Yeah, it was
But
Bobby
like
Rush.
what I'm talking about is Kamala Harris lost in 2019 in the primary. She lost in 2024 in the general election. Whatever we think about the quality of the effort, we're not talking about a fresh face, and we're not talking about someone who's ever won a hard race. Give me the person who has won the tough
Yeah, but
race.
all I'm saying, the point I'm making here is that she was a better candidate in
She
2024 than she
was,
was in
and she
2019,
may
and
continue.
people. Right. And
But
she has the kind of experience that like people like Shapiro and Newsom don't have. And look, Shapiro and Newsom, I give them a lot of credit. They are very they look.
you know,
Shapiro's likely to get a second term as governor. Newsom is one in California. Shapiro's achievements, I think, much more impressive. But running for president, I think he's running for governor of Pennsylvania. It's a very different ballgame, and you make mistakes. And like there's people like Obama who are, you know, preternatural political talents who can do that, but it's harder than people realize to run for president. And it's harder
I
to be to do a good job at it.
I agree with that. The one other thing I would say about Harris versus some of these other people that will be interesting is if she runs, she's going to be 65. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Gallego is 46, for example. Shapiro is 52. They could make some of what of a generational kind of change argument. Harris was relatively young the first time around in 2019. She was like 56. And now I wonder if people say, look, she's going to be in her 70s by a second term. Isn't it time for somebody younger? Isn't it time for the next generation? And especially someone like Gallego is younger, significantly younger. So I think
I
that
agree.
is an interesting element that will
Look,
kind of be a cross cleavage. But by the way, the other thing that we don't even know is they haven't even set a calendar yet. So we don't know which states are going to come first, which just makes all this analysis even harder.
look,
Um,
all I'm going to say is this. You're out everything you say I agree with. I'm just going to say that she will be a formidable nominee formidable candidate should she run. But I do agree that it's a long time in the future. It's really hard to make an assessment this far out. I will say this, and this is the point, a worthwhile pivot point. I think if I'm looking at the two parties right now, and I'm thinking about 28, I think Republicans are in a much worse position than Democrats. Much worse position. And I say this, no, let me make the
no,
point.
go.
They simply do not have a post-Trump political strategy. They don't. They don't have, okay, there's two things here. Trump's success in 2016 and 24, and to some extent his overperformance in 20, it's a direct result of him mobilizing these Trump-only voters. That's why he won in 24. Uh, the problem for Republicans is that no Republican has shown any ability to win over these occasional Trump
Yeah,
voters.
you're talking about Byron Donalds, I think.
Yeah, he's Republican, and so because of that, you know, um, uh, they don't have a clear strategy for who's going to come next for them and how they can win over these occasional voters. And I don't see any Republican. I don't see it in Vance. I don't see anybody else in the party who has the ability to mobilize those occasional Trump voters, but also who has the kind of appeal, which I find incomprehensible, but nonetheless, appeal that Donald Trump has. And so without that ability to mobilize those occasional voters and with the inevitable backlash that you're going to get from the end of a Trump term, look, there was a huge backlash to Trump in his first term as president. I mean, I make this point all the time that people just forget the fact that he was as popular in November of 2020 as he was in March of 2020. And the pandemic really didn't change much of his support. And if you look at all the head-to-head polling going back to 2019, Biden led them all in every single one of them. And that's why I think why he won. It wasn't so much because of COVID. It was because people just didn't like Trump. And I think by 2028, they'll feel the same way, particularly looking at where the numbers are now. So I think that if he survives 2028, I think he'll be a very unpopular president. And I think it'll be a real albatross for Republicans, even if it's someone like J.D. Vance. But, my theory on this is that I don't think Vance is guaranteed to be the nominee if Trump decides he wants Don Jr. to run. Because if Don Jr. runs, he's going to beat him. Now, I think he'll beat Vance. The smart thing for Republicans to do was to move as far away as possible from Trump. But I don't think they will do that because the incentive structure in the party is to try to out-Trump Trump in order to win over Republican primary voters. And if they do that, then they're going to lose badly because there's no figure who's had to out-Trump Trump who's been successful. Harold asked, can Trump Jr. is any chance of mobilizing his father's voters? Maybe. I'm not convinced of that. Maybe he can. The problem is that the backlash to Trump Jr., I think from, frankly, a lot of Republicans too, will be severe enough that I don't think he has any chance of winning the White House, any chance. So I just think they don't have a good strategy. And if J.D. Vance is the nominee, would you want to run J.D. Vance running on this president's record with his already low approval ratings and the fact that he just is not very popular? They have a big problem here, and they have not even thought of dealing with it. And I just use the example I always use, and this is my favorite example to come up with, is how screwed the Republican Party is. In 2024, remember when Trump was almost shot in Pennsylvania? This was before he picked Vance as his VP. What if he had died that day? Who would have replaced him as the Republican nominee? It's an impossible question because there's no clear, obvious person who could have replaced him. If Biden dropped out, I mean, besides Harris, there was a whole slew of Democrats who could have replaced him. That isn't that case in the Republican Party. There's nobody in the Republican Party who has that support across the party's various constituencies, or even across MAGA, which is really the main constituency. So I think that's a real problem for them long term, and it's one they have not dealt with. If Trump drops dead tomorrow, then Republicans are in a really tough space in 2028.
So we're going to flip roles from one conversation to the next and go to exact opposite roles. I agree with almost everything that you just said there. I would simply make 2 points. First of all, we are a lifetime away from 2028.
Yeah,
I was not
truth.
alive, but I'm pretty sure that in January of 1982, people didn't think Ronald Reagan's chance of getting reelected was pretty good. There was a
It's true.
recession and things looked bad. They were headed towards a midterm where it was going to get walloped. I know 1994, as things got worse and worse for Democrats, people think Clinton was getting reelected in 96. And I know those are incumbent presidents. I'm just saying that things change very fast in American politics. So I hesitate to say for sure that because things are bad for Trump today and he's deeply unpopular, that it will definitely continue. Because so much of this, as Michael has said to you over and over and over again, if you're here every week, so much of this is just about the economy. And you know,
It's not just the economy.
no,
I don't
I
think
know
it's
that. But like if the economy were going gangbusters in 2028, that's a very different scenario than if Trump has pushed us into a recession or a depression or something.
Look. The economy is going gangbusters throughout Trump's entire first term until the pandemic, and his approval rating was terrible, and he wasn't beating Biden head to head polling. I mean, I think I don't agree. I think the economy only matters so much anymore. I mean, I just think, it matters. It matters, but ultimately, Trump is an unpopular president. I mean, I was just struck by this today. We were talking about this earlier. You showed me some poll from some Colorado district that it's an R
It's
plus five district.
Jeff Hurd's district. This was Lauren Boebert's district that she fled because she was worried she couldn't win, I believe. I
Yeah,
think it's got like some really rich ski areas and then a bunch of rural area, if I remember correctly.
yeah, you're right. That's right. But so just to be clear, you made the point. So he is a Trump plus five district.
R
So
plus
Trump won
five,
by
yeah.
5 points. R plus five. So they asked people to judge, like, do you approve, disapprove? He's at 45-55, which is not great. I mean, not terrible, but it's not for +5, it's pretty bad. The 55% that rated him, the disapprove, they rated him fair. 48% rated him poor. And if you look at all of these pollings, it's what's interesting to me is how high the strong disapproval of Trump is. It is like
Yep.
46, 47. I think I saw one that was 49%. That's a really hard number to move. If just under half the country strongly disapproves of you, that's not going to turn around. I just isn't. And I will say this, like, look, you made up the point about Clinton and Reagan, and they both got reelected. Fair enough. However, they were incumbents. They also, by the way, ran in really good economies, right? Both Clinton did, and I mean, 82, the economy sucked. By 84, it was much better. And that's why
Right,
Reagan won
right, right.
49 states. And the problem is Trump's not running. And again, I just keep making this point that like the last three elections, the skeleton key for Trump has been these occasional Trump voters. And to his credit, I'll give his campaign credit. In 24, they made a point of mobilizing those voters. It's one of
He
the reasons
did.
why they won. But you have seen this repeatedly in every election. The inability of Republicans to mobilize those voters for other Republican candidates. And I just think, look, you got a weak VP, weak candidate in Vance. You've got a party that is not popular, a president that's not popular, policies that are not popular. I just think that, and this is maybe the most important thing, we are in a cycle once the last three elections have been, we've seen a term incumbent, right? Trump, then Biden. I'm sorry, no, wait a minute. I'm sorry, wait, we've had, no, I mean,
Obama, Trump,
Obama, Trump,
Trump, Biden, Trump.
Biden, Trump. Right. So the last three elections have been basically have seen a switch, which was a very unusual thing to happen in presidential elections. And we've had two one-term incumbents, which is also very unusual. So it not even just one-term incumbent, one term for a political party.
Presidency. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so Biden didn't run, sure, but generally speaking, incumbent party gets reelected. That didn't happen in 2024. So all I'm saying is that the deck is stacked against them. But what makes their situation so much worse is they do not have a post-Trump strategy. And what I think is going to happen is that Republican Party, when you get into 2028 to the primaries and caucuses, is that every Republican is going to try to out Trump. They're going to try to
Yeah.
be and that is a losing strategy in a national election. It's a winning strategy in the Republican primary.
Well, first of all, I agree with all of that analysis. I would just add 2 points. The first being that I think one thing that's really devastating for them while they try to out Trump is that Trump has a certain element of wry humor. He's a performer. There's an entertaining element, and most of the rest of them, when they try to pull it off, just come off sounding nasty and shrill, like JD Vance. Um, and so I think that that hurts them. I would simply add the caveat more broadly, though, to Michael's analysis by saying, as of January 21, 2026, that is spot on analysis. I
Fair
would
enough.
simply say that there is a long way to go. And if you had told me, I always try to think back. You told me on January 21, 2018, that the next presidential election was going to take place during a lockdown due to a pandemic, after an impeachment.
Yeah, but
That
that's not. But come on, don't give me that argument. That's
I,
look,
I, I'm,
we're not we do this. Look, there you can. You're of course you're right. Anything can happen, but you have to look at the broad sketches and the broad outlines. And I think my
absolutely.
argument that the broad outline Republican Party is that they've not shown an ability to win
I
without Trump
agree.
on the ballot. That's the reality here. Sorry.
I agree. No, I agree with that. I absolutely agree. I think it's why, until they prove otherwise, that's going to shape everything that we think about the midterms, about, everything that comes after. And I don't know that they'll be able to, whether it's Vance, whether it's Rubio, I'm skeptical that they can pull out those um, Trump only voters.
Yeah.
But I think that we'd be foolish to talk with any certainty. I mean, I honestly loathe the fact that they're even polling 2028 at this point. I think it's a waste of money for media
Agreed.
out
Agreed.
organizations. I just think it's way, 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 way too early. I think that's the biggest lesson of history. Is that trying to talk about presidential elections this far in advance while fun because it's interesting, there's all kinds of uncertainties and things, is not necessarily getting us anywhere just because so
I
much is
agree.
going to change.
So let's move on. I want to make.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on with one last
I
point, which is that I think when all is said and done in 20, that we will look back on 2024 as an outlier election, and that the progression is much more positive for Democrats, and we'll see 2024 as an outlier. That's a different conversation. But I want to get to unless something is
I
breaking that you
I
want to
no, I,
mention.
I I agree with that. I was just gonna say, I do think that if 2024 can be an outlier, but I also think that just about everyone is woefully unpopular right now. Democrat, Republican, both parties. I was talking about this for my subscribers, the World Courier and Brian yesterday, um, where Democrats are minus 14 in the decision desk. Average, and Republicans are like minus 12 or 12 and a half. Like everyone is underwater right now. Americans are just surly towards their politicians at the moment.
Okay, I'm just going to remind Gail and other people here that I am not Michael Cohen, who is a felon. Okay, so if you keep, I can't. It's been 10 years. People need to stop making this mistake. It's driving me up a fucking wall. He's a different person. He's a schmuck. Stop comparing me to him. Thank you.
That's a
Gail,
thank
by the
you for
way,
your attention to this matter.
my that it doesn't matter. And by the way, my basic response when people misidentify me with the other Michael Cohen is I need to subscribe to Truth and Consequences and get to be a paid subscriber because it's at this point I should not put up with this any longer. And the only recompense I can come up with is subscribing to my newsletter. Now, let's talk about another newsletter we like, which is Elliot Morris's Strength in Numbers. He has a new poll out this week, which shows Trump's approval at 40 58, which is pretty bad, which is in line with what Kelly. You can understand. Kelly O'Donnell says she sympathizes, and
That's
I
my
understand.
girlfriend.
That's your girlfriend,
So she,
exactly. Yes. So, but on the generic ballot, the Elliott has among registered voters, Democrats 51, Republicans 43%. But when pushed, asking who definitely vote or very likely to vote, it's 55 for Democrats, 42 for Republicans. That's a 13-point advantage. This is interesting because this is consistent with what we've been seeing, which is that Democrats are pretty far ahead in most polls on the congressional ballot. I've seen 4, I've seen 6, 8 seems a bit high, but who knows? I've also seen a lot of indication that even the ones that are having it at 4 or 6 saying among those likely to vote, it's even higher. Now, that's a pretty good number for Democrats. And what's interesting about it, as I saw this poll result, and right after it was in my Twitter timeline, right after a tweet that points out that Democrats in the special election in Georgia yesterday underperformed compared to what they've been doing in 2025. And in fact, in 2026 have been only about 8 points, eight
yeah,
points of
we talked about this.
overperformance.
I was gonna
Did
say we
we?
talked about this last night. It was
Yeah, but yes, yes,
12.2 in 2025 is the average, and I'm
right.
saying it's 8 in
It's now 8 in
2026.
2026. So that would suggest that there is, well, just Democrats are overperforming, not overperforming by as much as they were last year. So what the hell is going on? Now, I want to mention, by the way, about the Georgia thing. They underperformed in this Georgia. It was a jungle primary, so it was a little bit confusing. Republicans had a 2-point overperformance, but again, jungle primary wasn't 2 candidates; it was like a whole bunch of candidates. And in Virginia, the Democratic candidate in a special election did overperform by a pretty significant margin. I think it was like 14 points. So, but nonetheless, you're looking at a 8-point swing. Now, maybe this is just noise, small sample size. What do you think is happening here? Are Democrats like losing enthusiasm? How do you explain this, Brian?
I think there are two potential factors. One is the commonality in the seats where you've seen a lot of the drop off. There was, I think, one in Connecticut, but a lot of them are southern seats.
Hmm.
And so, one possibility out there, and I think it's something we have to be open to, is that in 2022, we saw Republicans have a wave benefiting them in the South. And we saw a lot of the rest of the country go in a different direction.
That's
And so
interesting.
one possibility is that the politics of the South are just different. and that there's a little bit of a bubble. Now, I don't like that theory because we saw Democrats win the Public Service Commission races in
Yeah,
Georgia
I was about to
in
say those two
November.
Georgia races in November, they crushed in those races.
So I tend not to gravitate towards that, but I do think that we ought to be open as we look at what happens between now and November, and we look at polling to the fact that the Southeast may go in a different direction. And I have a couple of theories as to why that is. First and foremost, being that when you start talking about the well-educated suburbanites who are powering the Democratic transformation in a lot of other places, that in the South they're also religious evangelical Christians, and that those are cross-cutting cleavages right now, and that may limit the ceiling for Democrats in some of these places.
Yeah, but some of the overperformance you saw back in 2025 was happening in southern states as
Right,
well.
right, right, right. So
Not just the
that's
Georgia race, but I think in Alabama, I think in South Carolina, there was some
right,
overperformance. I mean,
right.
I like your theory.
And remember here, we're not talking about the fact that Democrats are not overperforming Harris now. We're talking about the fact that they are overperforming her by less. All I'm saying is I could imagine, say, like a D+4 environment in the South and a D+9 environment everywhere else, or something like that. Okay. I know, again, I
That's
don't
fair.
like this theory. I prefer the theory that November woke Republicans up. A certain percentage of Republican voters who'd been ignoring special elections saw their party get wiped out in um November and said, okay, I gotta start paying more attention. And it
Yeah,
doesn't take much to knock it from a D+12.2 to a D+8 over performance. We're not talking, because remember, special elections, we're talking a couple hundred voters in one district, a couple
yeah,
hundred voters in
yeah.
another district. We're not talking about a huge percentage of people here. So I like that theory better, but I do think that we need to be open to the fact that, especially in a midterm where you get well-educated, high turnout voters are a greater proportion of the electorate, that the South may end up having its own political firmament, for lack of a better way of putting it, that we should keep our eye on that possibility.
That's a fair point. I mean, I think that look, that's makes sense. I think it's also just possible this is just noise and that
Right,
we
absolutely.
shouldn't take it too seriously. And
It's
then
it's January 20th. If we're still seeing this pattern June 20th or June 22nd, we'll go with my birthday because it's a special day
nice.
in America.
But
Um,
it should be
but
a holiday.
it should be really.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but we'll say, 5, 6 months from now we're still seeing this, and we'll also see turnout in relative turnout in primaries in places that have competitive races. If we're seeing something that shows a downturn for Democrats, I think that will be more significant. I agree with you though that we're 3 weeks into the year. We've had like a half dozen or a dozen races on a couple of nights, and we're talking about the middle of winter, where who knows
Yeah,
what the weather was.
I
It could
agree. I
just
think
be noise.
you gotta look at the broader trends. The broader trends of polling, which is that Trump's numbers. I mean, I was struck by something you know, in the YouGov Economist poll, I don't know. I don't think that's considered like a top tier pollster, but it was interesting that the YouGov poll last week had Trump at -14 underwater, and then a week later had him on -20. I mean, I only bring it up. Usually, I wouldn't make much of a point about that, but it's the same. But it's the same pollster, so it is interesting that they did, I saw a 6 point decline in his support. That could be meaningful. It might just be noise. But it is look, if you look at the top, and New York Times has this approval rating metric, which they basically break it into select pollsters who are kind of considered better pollsters and the sort of not as good pollsters. And if you look at the select pollsters, I mean, Trump's numbers are bad. They're really bad. They're like high 30s, low 40s, often below 40%. He was not this consistently below 40% in his first term. Um, he's not polling well. And then you look at the generic ballot. And then I'm going to also bring up, let's look at some of the interesting Senate polling we've seen. It's very early, and in many cases we haven't picked nominees yet. But just take North Carolina. There was a weird poll last week that had White Cooper up like 20 points or something. There's a more
It
sounds a
had
better
Watley at
poll.
like 27 or something. It was
Watley is
ridiculous.
the likely Republican nominee, like in the 20s. It was very strange. But it has the new poll out. This is Change poll. I'm not even sure what that is. They have Cooper up 47-42. Interestingly, they have generic ballot Dems 44-43, It's very interesting. So, I mean, Cooper probably is getting an advantage because he's well known in the state. And then on approval of Trump, he is 6 points underwater, 46-52, in a state that he did win in 2024. And Josh Stein, Democratic governor, is plus 13, 49-36. So that's good news for North Carolina. I have thought for a while that North Carolina is the most likely pickup for Democrats. Roy Cooper, two-term governor there, relatively popular, running against not against an incumbent, running against less well known Republican Michael Whatley. I think it's a good seat, good opportunity. Republican Democrats to pick up. And I also want to mention the new poll out in Alaska. This is a public policy polling, which is I think sort of
Th-
mid
This
tier
was a
pollster.
this was a DSCC paid for
Yeah,
poll.
DSCC poll, they had Mary Patola up by 2 points over Dan Sullivan, which ordinarily is good news. I mean, look, an incumbent being below 50% is always a good thing for his or her opponent. Sullivan's under 50%. That's pretty good. Patola, 49%. That's pretty good. However, this is an internal poll, so you'd expect it to be a little better for Patola. Uh, if I were her, I'd feel a lot better if it was over 50%. But that race, I feel like, is going to be nip and tuck the entire way. And I don't know that we're ever going to have a clear sense of who the winner. I mean, I don't. It's hard to imagine either one of these candidates pulling away. You know, Sullivan is. You would think would have the advantage because he's a Republican, and I would sort of put my money on him to win. But Patola has won twice statewide. She seems to have a base of support. It is a bad environment for Democrats, but it's hard to believe that she could really pull away in a state that went for Trump by something like 20 points in
It
2000.
was it
Maybe
was
not that high.
13,
6,
13.
13. Sorry, 13, which actually is sort of low, honestly, for relatively speaking,
Alaska
kind of
has
low.
moved in the Trump era
Yes, that is true. That is
towards the
true.
Democrats. I think the Crystal Ball UVA Kyle Kondak had an article the other day on this race. They moved it 2 categories from whatever their safest is to lean Republican.
Lean Republican, yeah.
And what Kyle basically said kind of fits with my feeling about this race, as well as Ohio, quite frankly. I think these are races where I can very easily paint a scenario where Mary Patola or Sherrod Brown gets to 48 or 49. It's harder to get them to 50 plus one. That last point or two is going to be difficult
Yeah,
in states that lean strongly against them. If you go back in Alaska, the only Democrat who has won a Senate race, Mark Begich, won it in Obama's victory year against an indicted Ted Stevens.
yeah.
It was a legendary senator in Alaska. Otherwise, I believe the last win would have been uh, Ernest Grunning in '74 or something
That
along those
sounds right.
lines. You're going back to the '70s. I can tell you it wasn't post 1980. I don't remember if it was Gravel or Grunning or who was the person, but I think it was '74 was the last win before that 2008 win. That's a long time
In fairness,
where
though, she Batola won the House seat. I think she was the
she
first Democrat to
did.
win that House seat in like 50, ever. I don't know. Certainly in a
Well,
very long time.
Don Young held it for most of that half
Don
century
Young
there.
held
Yeah.
exactly. So
But yeah, yeah. I mean, look, she is a strong candidate. It's a state that has moved towards the Democrats some. It is a state where Democrats have won the governor's office, I believe, multiple times in that period. So like, there's a chance there. There's a real legitimate chance. I would just say probably if I was putting a percentage on it, I'd say it's more in the 40 to 45% chance than the like 50 to 55% chance kind of
I
thing.
would probably go 35, 40%. I
Yeah.
really think Batola's a good candidate, but if you until I see evidence otherwise, I assume that Sullivan's going to win. I mean, I say that with the caveat that I shouldn't say that. I don't think he's going to win. Well, okay, if I had to bet a gun to my head, I think Sullivan's going to win, but I think this is going to be a close race. But you have to give the advantage to the Republican because it's a Republican. It's a red state. The same thing with Ohio. I think North Carolina is look. North
Oh,
Carolina does
okay. Let me
sure.
just throw a data point in here to complicate our discussion. We were talking about the R+5 district where Trump is -10 a couple of minutes ago, and where when they polled on, they gave them two choices. Now, obviously, it's a Democratic poll, but when they gave them two choices between a Republican who would support Trump and help implement or had Trump's endorsement help implement his policies, or a Democrat who would work in a bipartisan fashion for Colorado, the Democrat was up by 9 points. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, do you know what Alaska is according to Cook?
What?
R+6.
Huh.
So that suggests
Okay.
that Trump is probably 9 or 10 points underwater in Alaska. Um, and that, it is certainly something where you can imagine that number creeping up a little bit more, right? Maybe
Yes.
he's 12 points underwater by November, 13 points. So it's certainly a possibility. And the thing that Brown and Patola have in these two states is they are the kinds of candidates who can get the last 2 or 3 points on their own. Which is to
Yeah.
say, strong candidates still get you a couple of points. It's not like it was in, say, 86 or even 96 or something like that, where the candidate could run 20, 30, 40 points ahead of their party's
Yeah.
presidential
Yeah.
nominee. We don't have that, but you certainly could see that person get the last 2, 3, 4 points on their own. If the
Well,
national environment is such that,
keep in mind about Sherrod Brown, Ohio. In 2024, he ran, I believe, what, 7 or 8 points ahead of Kamala Harris.
yep, yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, he's shown an ability to run ahead of the Democratic ticket.
right,
I
right,
mean, the
right.
problem, Sherrod Brown's problem is that Ohio has moved much more to the right. But again, I mean, until I see better polling and understand the fundraising, I'm just
And
not going to
I,
assume that he can. I'm just going to assume Republicans going to win.
I will be very honest. There is very little I could see in the polling in either Ohio or Alaska that will make me confident heading into election day. And I'll tell you why. These are the kinds of states where Democrats have easily gotten to 48%, right? Potolo led in most of the polling last cycle. Not all,
Yeah.
but most.
Yeah.
Okay. Sherrod Brown led in most of the polling last cycle, and lost by like 3 points. And what you see, especially in Ohio, we saw this with Rich Cordry running for governor in 2018. We saw this with Tim Ryan running for Senate in 2022, is they lead in a lot of polling because you get like a 48, 46, don't know, like 6% kind of thing. And the problem is a lot of those undecideds or don't knows are Republicans who are wavering but end up voting for the Republican. And
Yeah.
it's just hard to get those last couple of points. And it's hard for me to envision polling where Sherrod Brown's at like 52 or something, where you're in a situation in which, oh, I feel relatively good on election day. I certainly will not be like fall out of my chair stunned. As Michael and I sit with you on election night, I'm not going to fall over if it looks like Sherrod Brown is winning. But I certainly don't think I'm going to ever go into election day in anything other than North Carolina or Maine feeling really confident.
Yeah. I think that's right. I agree. I agree with all of that, and I think that should be your how you approach these elections. I want to mention one other Senate race. We mentioned it
Louisiana.
earlier, Bill. Yeah, Louisiana, Bill Cassidy, who basically, Bill Cassidy, as I mentioned before, he voted to quit. He voted actually to convict Trump
Right.
in 2021 on his second impeachment. He is now up for reelection this year. He is facing a primary challenge from it
Julia
wasn't
Letlow.
guaranteed, but now Julia Letlow, the congressman of Louisiana, is challenging him. Cassidy has tried to like repair his relationship with the White House, and he, for example, voted to confirm RFK Jr. to his eternal disgrace. He
Despite
did
being a
that.
doctor who
Despite being
worked
a
on
doctor, yes,
transplant cases
yes,
and
yes,
being a
yes,
staunch advocate for vaccines.
right, and it didn't really help him much. In fact, my understanding was that John Toon, who's the majority leader, Republican leader, went to Trump and asked him to endorse Cassidy. He said he needs Cassidy's support, and basically Trump said no because he was pissed off about the his vote on the impeachment. And I was struck by something in Punchbowl that was interesting that pointed out that very few of the prominent Senate Republicans have come to Cassidy's defense since now that Letlow is in the race and Letlow has been endorsed by Trump, that they don't want to piss off Trump. So my guess is that Cassidy is screwed. I know he's a lot of money in the bank, but I don't. I think he's in big trouble. But just to be clear on this point, even if Letlow wins, she's not a crazy person. I mean, she's a MAGA Republican, so she's a
Oh,
little crazy, but she's
let,
not like full on insane like a Carrie Lake kind of individual.
let's bring up her two biggest selling points. She's a 40-something PhD. I
Yes,
have an affinity for those types of people. Um, but yeah, she's 44. She's a PhD, and an educator. She's not nuts as Southern,
she's not
especially as
nuts.
Southern Republicans go. And she was very cautious. She refused to get into this race without a public endorsement from Trump. But I mean, I see two things here. One, I am surprised that the NRSC and the Republican leadership hasn't been more vocal in the last couple of days, just because the party committees on both sides have a long standing policy of working for their incumbents, even in
Yeah,
safe seats.
but they're not doing it
We
because they don't want to piss
project
off Trump.
that's right. And so this brings me to my other point. And we should underscore what Michael said. This is a man who got down on his knees and was like begging for forgiveness from Trump. He voted for RFK Jr. despite not wanting to do it, thinking that the guy was a crackpot and a problem because specifically to fend off this result. Okay.
Yep,
He has voted with Donald Trump on everything. I don't think there's a
yep.
single vote where Bill Cassidy went against Donald Trump since Donald Trump's been back in office. He prostrated himself to the maximum possible extent. And what did Donald Trump do?
How'd that work out for him?
Donald Trump stood back and kicked him right in the balls.
Yep,
And that's
that's
exactly
kind of
what
what he did.
happened. And that should be a lesson to any Republican out there that um, loyalty to Donald Trump gets you nowhere. Donald Trump will show you no
No,
loyalty.
the
None.
opposite is true. The
Well,
opposite.
I'm getting there. I'm
Okay,
meandering
sorry,
my way there. Most of
sorry.
them are going to come away from this and say, "Well, if you ever cross Donald Trump, you're screwed, and therefore I can never get away from it ever. Once you've committed the heresy, you're screwed." But what
Right.
I personally would take away from this if I were a Republican is that self preservation is more important. You know, as Trump gets more and more underwater here, that showing him loyalty, putting your career at risk isn't going to get you anywhere. He's just going to kick you in the nuts if it's good for him. That's
Yeah.
all that it comes down to. And I mean, I say that I think Cassidy is done. I think Letlow, I think we could be doing this in 2060 and she'll still be in the Senate because she's only 44, one party
Uh,
state.
uh, yeah,
Um,
I wanted to make this point that I should have mentioned earlier that even if Letlow wins, a Democrat is not going to be competitive in this election, and this is going to be a safe Republican seat. So,
I
and that's
mean,
yeah,
I'll go a step further. I think Bill Cassidy could say, call a press conference tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm not letting primary voters decide my fate. I'm becoming an independent and I'm running, and he'd still lose.
he's still
There are
missing.
just not that many Democrats, and it is absolutely wild to me.
Actually, I don't know if I agree with you in that one. That's interesting. If he ran as an
Well,
independent, it was just him and Letlow, he could win. He'd win Democratic votes.
that's true, and Democrats have won the governorship.
Ah, actually, why would you? Why would you bother? He's a Republican. He's not going to support your
Well,
agenda.
the interesting thing is, I remember reading something a while back that said that Cassidy was basically a liberal Democrat right up until it stopped being advantageous in Louisiana, as the things shifted during the W. Bush years, and the John Bro, Mary Landrieu wing of the party atrophied and stopped being able to win. That he kind of swung with the state. So I don't know what principles he actually has.
You know what? That's actually an interesting thought experiment. If he became a Republican, a Democrat, would he win the seat? And I actually
No,
think there's a
not
case to
as
be made
I don't think as a
that he would be
Democrat.
competitive.
I think as an independent, he
Why
would be
not?
competitive.
No, because I think if he's independent, a lot of Democrats would be like, why am I going to space I'm voting between two Republicans? And Democrat would still want to run in the primary.
That
I'm not running the primary. Democrat would still run for the seat. Maybe then
that
you split the vote, but I doubt it. I doubt
but
it.
like
No, you
I'm
don't split the
talking
seat.
about like
Over the
let's
vote.
say he's an independent with John Bell Edwards' endorsement, the Democratic governor who just left office. Because first of all, then you avoid the possibility of a pro-choice challenger in a primary in a,
Why would Bell? If frankly, if Gassi ran as independent, then Bell Edwards would have every incentive to get in the race because he would have
that's
a relative
actually
chance.
true.
He'd have a
That's
relative
actually
chance of winning.
that's actually true. That would be the scenario in which you could have it. And remember, they changed the rules to punish Bill Cassidy. Louisiana used to have one of those jungle primary systems
Yeah,
where
right, right.
you could have had a runoff between these two candidates where all the Democrats could have voted for Cassidy. They changed it to a primary and a general system. And again, if I were Bill Cassidy, that's exactly what I'd do. I'd change parties tomorrow. Say, okay, Donald, screw you.
Isn't he the aggravation?
But
He'll just
what I
run it. He'll
actually think
lose,
is going to
and
happen is he's going to lose in May in the primary, and then he's going to spend the next 6 months making life miserable for Donald Trump because he can. especially not just Donald Trump, but especially RFK Jr., that all of a sudden you're going to see much more rigorous oversight from the Senate Help Committee, because Cassie's going to have nothing to lose
Well,
at
I
that
mean,
point.
that's a little bit like closing the barn door after the
Correct.
horses have departed.
Absolutely. That's why I say, if I'm Cassidy, I'm probably very, very, very quietly pulling some of these options because and look, you can't execute a party switch the way the late great Arlen Specter did,
Yeah,
where it becomes transparent. It's about not losing. You have to go with the my party left me kind of thing. But I could see someone becoming an independent under that count, saying, "Look, nobody shows up in primaries. I want to have this fight with a full electorate." Um, I could see ways that he could preserve himself in that way, especially and honestly, that is one incentive for the party committees to fight, to signal to him at least that they are for him and that they're going to be for him and that they're going to help him, because that would keep him in a Republican primary. If
yeah.
he thinks they're just going to abandon him, then why would he show them loyalty? Because here's the thing. Bill Cassidy is a Democrat or an independent. I am very skeptical he wins the race, but it would cost Republicans a lot of money that they then have to spend against Bill Cassidy in Louisiana to hold the seat.
He's not going to do it. He's not
No,
going to do it.
no,
No.
no. None
So
of
let
these
me.
guys have enough balls for that.
No, no,
That's
no,
truly
no.
the
No,
answer.
agreed, agreed. Let me bring up something. I just noticed this on Twitter. I think it's interesting. The Economist broke down some of their numbers by state, and here's some interesting numbers of Trump's approval rating in Georgia, for example, minus 18.6%. It's good news for John Ossoff. In Maine, minus 18.4. I'm going to go back to something I said a while ago. Honest to God, Susan Collins should lose this race, and as long as Democrats can nominate somebody who's reasonable, like Janet Mills, I just don't think she can win. I know that's a crazy. I know I shouldn't say that because of what happened 6 years ago, but this is a different environment, and I just think that
Look,
with Trump that far underwater in Maine, it's just hard to see how she does this twice in a row. Let me give you a few more before you jump in. Texas Trump is minus 17.2%. That's a crazy number, and I don't
I
understand
don't
why he's so
buy that.
unpopular in Texas. But you say that, and I get why you say that. But he's been unpopular in Texas for a while. That number seems high, but he's been unpopular for a while. Um, Other ones, North Carolina is 13.6% underwater, Ohio 9.2%, Iowa, your favorite one, 8.7%. I mean, the Texas one, interesting, this week, interesting story broke where John Cornyn said that he is most afraid of James Tallarico being a Democratic nominee. Tallarico got some good poll results last week that showed him beating Jasmine Crockett. He's been raising a lot of money. Ezra Klein gave him a little perch on on his podcast talk to make the case to Democratic donors nationwide. Tallarico could win that race, and again, this is in Texas is a really fascinating race because if Cornyn wins the primary, which he very well might, he will win. I'm sorry, I don't see any scenario in which a Democrat beats Cornyn in Texas. Although, I shouldn't say that. I should step back because I do think Cornyn wins no matter what, but there are a lot of Republicans who don't like Cornyn. I mean, his real ratings are terrible. I assume Republicans will come around even if he wins the nomination. Um, but it's not like it was 6 years ago for him. I just don't think the
The
Democrats.
other thing
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
we should bring up when we're talking about James Tallarico versus John Cornyn, and I'm googling real quickly here to get the data. Um, but James Tallarico is how old is he?
It's in his
He
40s, I think,
I think
maybe 30s.
he's 36. He's
Wow.
36. John Cornyn is well into his 70s. He's 73. So if ever there was a race where you could see somebody running on generational change, it's I'm half of your age, kind of thing.
Yeah, but
So
that
there
generational argument doesn't play so much. It plays in Democratic primaries. I don't know if it plays so much in Democrat in among Republicans.
that is certainly
Who you would
possible.
need to cross party lines to vote
I
for
mean,
Tallarico.
my only thing with that polling, I buy that Trump is more unfavorable than favorable in Texas. I just think if we were looking at that was a Democratic poll in that R plus 5 district, and that was Trump was minus 10. So I don't think Texas is that much more would be that much more than like R plus it's certainly no bet it's not like R plus two or something. So
Look, I
well,
don't.
I think
I'll be
there's a
honest with you. I don't.
greater
I kind of agree with you, but this is not the first poll that I've seen that has Trump underwater in Texas, and I don't know
no,
why he's so unpopular,
I
but
I think
17 seems
he's
high.
right, right. I would buy it if it was he's -9. I might buy that -8, something like that. I just don't think it's double digit. One thing that we should always that we should say to people here, polling is getting harder and harder as a
Yeah.
science. The rise of the internet, the loss of landline phones, the fact that you definitely have a pocket of Republicans who don't trust pollsters, it's getting harder and harder to do. So even when we cast doubt on polls, it's not to say that the pollsters are not good. They're not trying. It's just really hard at this point. And it's easy to be off by a few points. But if you ask me to guess, I would say that Donald Trump is probably like maybe it's like 47-53 in Texas, something like that, favorable, unfavorable. Like if you ask me where I think the electorate actually is, I think he's more unpopular than popular, but it's probably single digits.
But let's be clear again, just to sum it up on Texas. The only chance Democrats is if Ken
Ken
Paxton is
Paxton.
nominated. The only chance they have,
Although
and
it
even
sounds
then
like
they may not
Wesley
win.
Hunt is not particularly well liked. Um,
He's the third
but
Republican running in the primary.
he's a black veteran congressman, a veteran and a congressman from the Houston area. But it sounds like he pisses just about everyone off. So I don't exactly know how he'd play in that race if he ended up being the nominee. What I know is this, and what Michael is saying is if John Cornyn's the nominee, the odds are very strong that he wins. In
Yeah,
anything
Paxton.
other than the wave equivalent of the snowstorm apparently bearing down on DC, they're talking about 18 to 24 inches and 8-degree wind chills for the weekend. Like if you got that level of wave, then maybe. But otherwise, no.
We're looking at more than a foot here in New York. Another poll I just saw. It's interesting. The new Senate poll in New Hampshire has Chris Pappas, like the Democratic nominee, 50-45 over. I think it's Chris Sununu, I believe, not the former
No, no,
governor.
no, no, no. It's John. It's not the former
It's
governor.
not
It's
Chris.
the former
Chris is the
senator.
former governor.
Talk
Sorry.
about what waiting for a comeback for a while. He lost to Jean Shaheen, who took this seat from him in 2008. 18 years later, she is retiring, and he's trying to take it back.
Right. So he's up. Pappas is up by 5 points, 50-45. And then again, Scott Brown, who apparently is thinking of running there, it's 52-42. Pappas is up 10 points. I mean, that is a seat that I, just for the record, would pretty much assume Democrats are going to win. New Hampshire has trended more blue recently. It's a good environment. It's hard to imagine that Democrats lose seat. Of course, anything is possible.
You know what?
Anything.
Let me bring up a poll, and I was going to double back to Maine, but can I bring up a poll that we got last week that polling that has puzzled the everlasting heck out of me?
Sure.
Um, we keep seeing these Michigan Senate polls that show
Yeah.
Mike Rogers winning, and I am pretty sure that some of that is just that he ran last cycle and has greater name recognition than any of the three Democrats. But I keep trying to say to people, the polling has to be modeling the electorate wrong. That in 2018, I believe that Gretchen Whitmer won by 10 points in a
Yes.
blue wave, and that was an open governor's race. So this is an open Senate race. That I just can't conceive of a scenario in which you have a good cycle for Democrats, not even an out and out wave, but a good cycle for Democrats in which they lose the Michigan Senate race, a place where the Republicans have won one Senate race since 1972.
Yeah, let me just endorse that view. Unless they nominate, is it Abdul
Abdul
Saeed
Al Saeed.
Saeed? If they
He was
nominate
doing
him,
worse in that. Of the three candidates, he did the worst in that poll, by the way. Pod Save America, guys.
yeah, yes, right. They did a fundraiser for him. I assume that the nominee will be Stevens and McMorrow, and I agree with Brian that I would be shocked if Democrats don't win that seat. I'd be absolutely shocked because it's a good environment with Democrats in a state that has really leaned blue, except for the presidential last year, or 2024. I'm sorry, and in general, Republicans have just flamed out on the statewide level for several years now there. It's just hard to imagine a scenario in um,
The
which
governor's race, by the way, is much more in doubt. I was reading about this race again this morning because the Detroit mayor, former mayor Mike DeGan, who's a Democrat, who's running
he's
as an
making
independent,
trouble, making
he's
trouble.
pulling like 20%. And I keep trying to say to people, somehow if he doesn't get out, that's a problem for Democrats because he's going to take mostly left of center voters. There's no way around it. He claims he's not. That's bullshit. He's taking votes from left of center voters.
Yeah, let's actually get to something involving Congress because you mentioned this to me offline. I think we should talk about it. There is a we are getting close to the end of the funding, the
Nine
government
days.
funding, 9 days,
We need one of those
and
little CNN countdown thingies for our
yeah, we do.
two
And so
bearded
it's nine
countdown.
days. Do a countdown. So it's 9 days until the government's out of money. The big sticking point is funding for DHS. As some of you may have seen, King Jeffries said earlier today he's a hard no on DHS funding. He wants uh, some conditions, basically mandating body cameras for ICE agents, which, by the way, should already be mandated. No deportation of U.S. citizens, which again should already be mandated. A few other things as well. This is an interesting question. Look, Democrats are not going to support this in the House, what's called the mini omnibus. Uh, is there any chance Democrats filibuster this in the Senate?
Well, okay, I want to get to that in 1 second, but since we were just talking about a new poll just dropped, a Jasmine Crockett internal poll.
Yeah, I saw that.
That spoiler alert is not good for Jasmine Crockett. She's up 46 to 33, 21% don't know, but the name ID for her is 82% and Tallarico's only at 64%,
Yeah,
which
that's negative
suggests
for
that
her.
she is not in good shape. But in terms of DHS, it sounds like they're going to be about a hand 5 to 15 Democrats in the House who vote for it. And one thing I'm wondering, Republicans have an issue with the rule here because Democrats have not been voting for the rules on these minibuses. For those who don't understand the procedures, the House, because it's very arcane, rule votes are usually party votes. There's always been unwritten rule before the Kevin McCarthy, Mike Johnson debacle where you vote for the rule even if you're going to vote against the bill. And they've had real trouble on rules. If they end up needing the Democrats on the rule, one possibility is they break the DHS bill out because Democrats want to support the rest of it. They got lots of things they like. There's some
Yeah,
healthcare stuff in there.
yeah,
But it sounds like most of the, frontline purple state or purple district types are going to vote for this. And so I don't see them having the votes to filibuster it in the Senate. I they got one of the points that people are making that Henry Cuellar, the border Democrat, conservative Democrat from down the Rio Grande border, who's the appropriations cardinal for this, who negotiated this bill, saying is, look, this doesn't have the constraints in it that I would like, but it's got more than if we just fund them on a continuing resolution, and there's no constraints at all.
right.
Um, my suggestion, my guess is this is where you get the clubby Senate network kicks in and you get amendment votes on things that
Yeah,
Democrats want that aren't going to pass because I don't actually think they have the votes. I also think I said this last week, I think filibustering the Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill and shutting DHS down over ICE, well, understandable, is a mistake. And I say it's a mistake because DHS does a lot of other things. They deal with terrorism. They deal with, a lot of other stuff that if something goes wrong while they're shut down, there's a lot of potential for blowback there. On, all this other stuff. It's not just an ICE funding bill or an
so
immigration thing.
let me pick up on this point because first of all, I think we agree there will not be a government shutdown. They're not going to shut down over DHS funding, no matter what. I mean, I know that
By the way,
like,
I think there could be some rocky shoals where they delay the process, where things get held up, where it takes a couple of extra weeks, but I don't think they'll actually shut it down.
I don't think so either. I also don't think Republicans have much incentive to compromise. I think they think this is a winning issue for them. I don't agree, but that's what they think. But I want to bring up something else completely, which is related to this, but I want to get your thoughts on, because this issue has come up quite a bit on sort of social media discourse
Oh, the
among
are you
Democratic
talking about
pundits.
defund ICE?
Yeah, the
Oh,
abolished ICE thing. So here's the thing. Just why I want to bring this up. So a lot of Democrats are now saying abolish ICE. Uh, and you're shaking your head, which is good because that means we're going to have a little bit of disagreement here. And we like disagreement. It's good. It makes it more.
it
It
makes for a
makes
good
it.
show.
It makes for a good show. So basically, what what is happening is you have some Democrats are saying abolish ICE. I was struck by the fact that someone like even AOC wasn't saying that. She was sort of saying take the money. Like her argument is like, why are we saying like on ICE for saying on healthcare? But I got to say something about this abolish ICE thing. I actually don't think it's such a loser for Democrats. And here's why. This is not like the defund the police conversation. People like the police. People think the police play an important role in our society. I do, even if I don't like dislike some other excesses. I think most people think the police have a tough job and they want the police to be able to be in their neighborhoods and to be keeping them safe. So defund the police was never a good argument. But by the way, so we're clear, defund the police, which you heard a lot in 2020, didn't really hurt Democrats politically all that much. Didn't hurt them in the 2020 election, and
No,
maybe it weakened them
I
on
mean
some
they
of the
lost
House.
House seats.
Well, maybe. I mean, it's possible to hurt them, but we didn't hurt them in presidential. That's for sure. It didn't hurt them in Senate elections. I don't think all that much. I mean, look, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. Could have hurt them in the House races, but again, no prominent Democrats endorsed defund the police. This was an activist call. Now, abolish ICE is mostly being made by activists, and you can't stop them from saying this. And Democrats can sort of say we don't believe in that. But I am struck by the polling on this, which does show, you know, a significant number of Americans actually do think we should abolish ICE. And if you look at, for example, the YouGov poll, and I don't love citing YouGov because I mean, that's the problem with YouGov is they do these very comprehensive polls where they have lots of questions, but they also tend to not be the best pollster. However, among independents, it's like a 46-34 supported abolishing ICE. Um, the thing is that I think in the near term, I don't think it's the worst message for Democrats. I don't think it's your good message in October of 2026. But if right now you're talking about abolishing ICE, considering what people are seeing in Minnesota, which by the way does not have strong public support, it doesn't. I mean, the numbers are pretty clear. People think the Renee Good shooting was bad. They don't like what ICE is doing. I'm not sure that abolish ICE, at least in the near term, as a way of raising the profile of this issue and certainly also energizing Democrats, is the worst thing in the world. And, I'm sort of the view, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And as you get closer to the election, Democrats who are in tough races are going to figure out what they want to say about this. And I'm sure most of them are not going to say abolish ICE. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Some activists are saying it. Go ahead, tell me
I
why I'm wrong.
I do not understand, and I felt this way about defund the police, why any movement, activist, politician would ever use a slogan that is more extreme than what they actually want to do. I don't see any value
That's a great
in,
point, by the way.
in that.
That's a great point.
Nobody is saying we need to have no immigration enforcement mechanism whatsoever. That you could have, somebody who gets out of jail for violent crime who has a deportation order and there's nobody to deport them. Nobody is saying that. We are all saying, I think, the same thing, which is ICE needs significant constraints upon what they can do, who they can stop, who they can harass. If you don't have if they don't have probable cause that someone has a removal order against them, they shouldn't be able to stop them. They shouldn't be able to bother them. They should have to wear body cameras, uniforms, and get rid of the masks. Like, there's a lot of areas where we can agree. I have two problems. The first is it is more extreme than what they actually want to do. And this was the problem with defund the police. People out there who don't pay a lot of attention to politics hear defund the police and say they want to get rid of the police. Are they nuts? Republicans even ran
But
ad
that,
after
but
ad
I,
in
oh,
2020.
hold on. But this is what I go back to what I said a second ago. This is not the same thing. The police are relatively popular. People
I
want the police.
understand.
ICE is not. And let me say one thing to your point. Look, you reforming ICE. I'm not even sure that's even workable at this point because if you look at the culture of that organization, a culture of organization in which uniformly these agents are going along with what are unconstitutional and incredibly, illegal activities, it tells me that the entire sort of I don't know, culture of ICE is rotten to the
I
core and
agree.
needs to be replaced. I don't know that you can
I
reform it. I'm
I
not convinced you can actually.
I agree with that. If you told me that you wanted to fire everybody who's there already, or the vast majority of them, I would support that. I just don't think that saying something that is more extreme than what you want to do. People here defund ICE as eliminate
Abolish ICE.
immigration, abolish ICE as eliminate immigration enforcement. And I don't think that that is a helpful message when you consider, especially that you're heading into a cycle where the Senate playing field is red states. Okay. It's not even purple states, it's red states. You need to win some of those Latino voters in South Texas who are sympathetic to immigration enforcement. Okay. For Tallarico to have a chance in a Senate race. I don't see the upside of doing this, and I think that what ends up happening, first of all, is that a certain percentage of people say, "Well, the Democrats are just nuts. They're not the common sense party. They're even more nuts than the Republicans." But I also think that there's another major element of this, which is it leads to that much more of Democrats fighting with Democrats and a circular firing squad and deep divisions in the coalition between the moderate wing of the party and or I wouldn't even call them moderate. They're liberals. Okay, and the leftists, where you've created another litmus test where the politicians are trapped between primary voters and the base and the activists and general election voters. And I really don't understand why we're busy fighting amongst ourselves when we can be fighting with Donald Trump.
I mean, I don't disagree with you on that latter point, but I just I'm all I'm saying is I don't know that I mean, first of all, if someone like Tallarico can say, like, some Democrats want to abolish ICE, I don't want to do that. Maybe that actually helps him. Maybe it allows him to establish his sort of centrist bona fides. All I'm saying is that this is not the same thing as defund the police. This is a position that is more popular than defund the police. It's a position which is, I think, reasonable to make because of if you look at the excesses of ICE. And I think that right in January of 2026, I don't think it matters all that much. Now, again, I think Democrats will figure out between now and November what the best message is on ICE and on immigration in general. Um, and look, they'll
And it's going
probably
to
figure out
vary from race to
it's going
race
to
too.
vary from race to race. And I think that like I'm not, I don't, look, my instinctually when I hear abolish ICE, I have the same sort of response that you have, Brian. I'm like, that's a bad message. But and that was my initial thought when I heard it. But then I saw some of the polling, and now I'm thinking to myself, well, the polling is pretty negative on ICE, and I do wonder if it's the kind of message that does actually motivate Democratic voters, or at least shows a certain inclination of Democrats to think bigger. I mean, look, my problem with Democrats in general, they don't think big enough, and they don't think big enough. And I think there's always this inclination to like lowest common denominator politics and try to like appeal to the middle, and I get all of that. But at some point, you actually need to stand for something, and I do think that there is a certain advantage for Democrats standing. I'm not sure this is the right issue to do it on, but I think Democrats should be a lot more aggressive on ICE, on Trump's immigration crackdown than they should use their advantage. I think there's a lot of backlash to what Trump has done. And, you know, there's this idiotic argument about one of the responses to the abolish ICE is like, well, we're not trusting on border security. We have to get trusted on border. This is Adam Gentelson's argument from Searchlight Institute. We have to get trusted on border security. No, you don't. No, you don't. Because you know why? People aren't voting on goddamn border security this election. They're voting on the economy. They're voting on Trump. They're voting on inflation. They don't. This is not. Look, you're not going to win by being Republican mini me's. Okay, like you need to be aggressive on this issue and sort of make the case that what Trump is doing is hurting the country. And it is. And people believe that. The polls show that. So all I'm saying on the abolish ICE thing is let's not just assume because you and I think this and our instincts is like, that's not a good idea. Let's see what the polling says. Let's see what the focus groups say. And then before we could come to a conclusion about this.
I, look, I think that the Democrats do need to convince Americans that we are the sane, responsible party on immigration because it sure as hell isn't Donald Trump. We Donald Trump is acting in abhorrent ways. ICE is out of control. They're a bunch of thugs. They are stormtrooper. Like I have nothing but negative things to say. They need to fumigate the entire institution of ICE. Okay.
Yes.
But I do think that we need to be the party that is for a pathway to citizenship, comprehensive immigration reform, and border security.
Oh,
um, and say that
interesting.
we're the responsible ones. The other thing I will raise that this is the thing that bothers me the most. You've got a lot of contested 4 or 5 way House primaries, okay, in competitive districts. Mike Lawler's district in New York is just one example of many, many districts like this. Okay, when you start getting things like abolish ICE, they become litmus tests with the exact 10% of base voters who are going to show up in primaries. And then what you end up having is what I call the 2019 primary process, where the party ends up taking a lot of stances that they know are out of touch with the mainstream to win primaries and that please activist groups. And you end up having people adopt a message that they don't actually think is a good idea because that's what the activists want and that's who shows up in primaries. And we're talking about primaries where you're going to win with
Look,
22%.
look. You obviously, I agree with you. I mean, obviously, on that point. By the way, I apologize. I had to go get my charger to charge my phone up so it would not go dead. I agree with you, but look, all I'm saying is, I look. We should be a little humble here. We don't know
Oh, absolutely.
the
Well, what was I
depths.
saying about the presidential stuff?
No,
We
it's
should
true. It's
be
true. No, no,
humble.
of course. And I wasn't directing that at you. I'm just saying the immediate knee jerk assumption. This is a losing message of Democrats. I want to see some data before I draw that
That's
conclusion.
fair.
And beyond
I mean, we
that,
should want that on everything. We should be the party that
yes,
makes the
yes.
data-driven decisions. And again, I agree that we should stand for things. I don't think that there is a single Democrat out there who does not want major changes at ICE, who is not disgusted with ICE. I just think the only two things where I part with people is I don't know that shutting Homeland Security down is the right way to go about getting that.
But
And I don't
okay.
think that abolish ICE is a smart slogan.
So let me just say, I guess, and this is maybe where we disagree with me a little bit. I'm not so sure that saying abolish ICE in January of 2026 is the same thing as saying in October 2026. And I don't have a real problem with activists. Look, first of all, you can't stop activists from saying
Right,
it.
they
You're not,
can say
you
whatever they
can't.
want.
Well, yeah, they want exactly, and if they want to say it, and if some Democrats want to go along with it, that's fine.
I'm just saying
Whatever.
this
Look,
can't be a litmus test.
yeah, I know, I agree, but let me finish this point. Whatever happens, you and I both know that Republicans are going to accuse Democrats of wanting to abolish ICE,
Right.
no matter what they say,
Because
and
as
they're going
soon
to
as the
accuse them
first
of supporting
activist
open
said that,
borders,
that's what you get.
and there's no way to control that. And my argument is like, you know, in some cases, you might want to lean into it. In some cases, you might want to use it as a foil. I mean, I could imagine how a Democrat in lots of places in North Carolina, in Alaska, in Texas, could use the argument, the activists think abolish ICE as a foil and say, I'm not like those people. And I don't love when Democrats do that, just in general, because I think it's actually hurts the party overall. But I get that's a way to help yourself, establish, like basically distance yourself from the rest of the party. I
And I look where I disagree a little bit with the Gentelsons of the world is I think what you do if you're in a red state or red district is you beat the crap out of the activists on the left. You go at them hard. You say, no, that's an idiotic slogan. No, you could
No,
do that.
that's exactly his argument. That's what Jennison would say you should do. They all believe in hippie punching, and
Right.
but my problem with
Well,
him and like Iglesias, all these guys, is they're all fighting the last battle, right? He thinks the border security. He thinks Democrats being better on border security matters. It mattered. It didn't even matter that much. It mattered in 2024 a
mattered
little bit.
some.
Mattered some. It doesn't. It's not going to matter in 2026. No,
I
not going to matter in 26.
I do come back to we talked I think a little bit about Seth Bodner last week briefly, but John Tester and I don't think these text messages have been verified yet that they actually came from him, but he was talking about how the what an albatross the Democratic Party was around him the last couple of times he ran. And I do think that we need to be listening more to the purple and red state Democrats. That the people, frankly, the person we should be following on immigration is Ruben Gallego. Okay. An Arizona Democrat understands this issue better than anybody else, given that how much it plays in the politics there. And I'd be looking for my cues from Arizona Democrats and other border state Democrats, not the activists on the left. And I do think that we as a party need to listen more to the red state folks, not the activists who would like to force all of us in directions that frankly activists in both parties, and this is not new, want to push their parties towards positions that are not majority positions most of the time because they're
You know,
more extreme than the rest of us. And that's fine.
I
Activists have a place in our politics.
I guess the thing is, it's interesting, and maybe this is just like my own personal journey. But my sort of default position is what you just said, which is assume liberal activists are, or the activists on the left or even on the right, um, are problematic for Democrats, and that they push the agenda in ways that hurts Democrats. I don't know if I still believe that as much as I once did. I think on some issues it's true, but I think this stuff gets overplayed. And I think if I go back to thinking about, like, for example, 2024, I mentioned this earlier, people made about big issue with the trans issue, and how that hurt Harris. And I mean, did it hurt her? Probably. Was it as decisive an issue as the economy and this anti-incumbent fervor that exists in the country? No, I don't think it was. And I also think there's a consequence when you end up saying, well, we have to just, stop talking about trans rights. Well, guess what happens? Republicans do terrible things to trans Americans, which is what's happening right now. So I guess in a way, I think I'm skeptical of these arguments a little bit and how much they matter. And I guess I partly feel that we overstate how much of a role it's like. Look, because here's why. On immigration is a good example of this. Like, you could people would argue for, well, if Biden had just done different things in immigration, he would have gotten more support. Bullshit. Republicans were always going to run immigration because Biden was never going to put forward an immigration policy that was anywhere near as draconian as the one that Trump did in his first term. And because of that, he was always going to get bashed for it, and he was always going to play with Republicans. There's no way you could really outrun that, no matter what you did on policy. Because no matter what Biden did on policy, the Republicans were going to characterize it as being open borders and letting immigrants in, and so on and so forth. So I think we have to get to understanding that policy that matters a lot less than we think it does. And on and Republicans are going to attack Democrats on these issues no matter what they say. And so I think you have to sort of make that into account, and also, like, not just assume that the liberal actors are always wrong or you always have to bash them. In some cases, maybe they're right, or maybe their positions are not completely wrong. And on defund the police, it was a wrong position to take. On abolish ICE, I don't know. And I find the certainty of people who say this is a losing position for Democrats, when the polling certainly suggests that a lot of people support abolishing ICE. I find that certainty unsettling. And I wish people would be a little more humble before they just go back to their ideological priors and assume that this is bad. Because, by the way, my prior is that abolish ICE is a bad message. But I also think I should be a little more humble in saying, well, what did the data say? Is that actually correct? Before just jumping to that conclusion.
Trump seems to have called off the tariffs against NATO in the last
What
couple of
what a
minutes.
surprise! What a
They have
surprise!
some sort of agreement, he claims. But here's the thing. I resisted for a long time the idea that the Democrats had moved dramatically ideologically over the last 10 to 15 years. And I've come to think that I was wrong before, that it happened very gradually. There wasn't some big dramatic shift moment or anything like that. But what ended up happening is that Republicans totally flipped the cultural playing field from where it was in the Obama years, where we were talking about abortion rights and LGBTQ marriage, where those issues were hurting Republicans actively, towards cultural issues that I think you're right that it's not about individual policies. I think you're right that Republicans are going to attack Democrats either way. But I do think that there is a perception that has emerged, and I think it was a combination of immigration stuff, trans stuff, frankly, to some extent, some of the post Me Too stuff and some of the speech policing as well, where we've gotten to a point where there's a lot of people who might otherwise be open to Democrats who think they've gotten too extreme culturally. And it's a perception. It may not be accurate. I tend to agree much more with the activists on the issues than I do with them. But I do think that there is a pool of voters, younger male voters, quite frankly, um, who there are some real issues there. And look, the batshit
Whoa,
insane
wait a
party.
minute. Hold on. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said.
Sure.
Okay. Among younger voters, the numbers have shifted dramatically
Younger male
against Trump.
voters, to be clear.
Younger, even among younger male voters, the numbers have shifted dramatically against Trump. Right. So,
Right, but
I
you
mean,
could be shifting against Trump and still think, "Hey, I'm not loving those Democrats. They're, too extreme."
here's my problem with these cultural arguments. A lot of the cultural positions the Democrats took in 2024, they also took in 2020. It did not stop them from winning the trifecta that year. Okay. They won the Senate. I know they did lose seats in the House. You were correct. But they won the Senate in 2020. They won the House presidency in 2020. 2024, I'm going to keep making this case. It's possible you're right. And the folks who make this argument that Democrats lost because of cultural issues. But, as I've always I like to point out, every incumbent party in the world, in a democracy, lost voter share in 2024. In fact, the Democrats were like on the low end of losing voter share, but it was enough for them to lose the White House. All I'm saying is that there's a tendency, I think, not for you, but among a lot of pundits, to assume the reason why a party lost is because of the issue that I care most about. So if I think Democrats are too far to the left, that's why they lost 2024. By the way, if you're a leftist, right, you think because Kamala Harris was too much to the center or wasn't tough enough on, Israel, that's why she lost, right? It's all about where you sit. And all I'm saying is that, you know, I'm very skeptical about this kind of cultural argument because it is based on a very small sample size, which is 2024. It doesn't explain what happened in 2020. It doesn't explain what happened in 2022 to some extent or 2018. It
Let
doesn't.
me throw an
Or by the way,
interesting
and one more point, it doesn't explain what happened with Democrats in swing state elections for governor and Senate, where they dominated in 2020, even though they lost the presidency.
let me throw a counterfactual out there. Because you keep putting up the data point, Democrats won a trifecta in 2020, and you're right. But I think that most of the conventional wisdom in politics is Democrats won that trifecta because Donald Trump refused to concede the election, and therefore they lost two special elections in Georgia that cost them the Senate. But because remember, on election night in 2020, the Democrats got fewer votes in those two Georgia Senate races. And in Senate races across the country where Democrats vastly outspent their Republican opponents, places like Iowa and Alaska, Texas, this is the same cycle that's up now. Okay. Maine, Susan Collins got doubled up money wise. Democrats lost those races. How different do you think the perceptions of things would be if what we had seen in 2020 was Trump concedes, Republicans hold those Georgia Senate seats, it's a 52-48 Republican Senate, Republicans have gained 9 seats in the House. Is there anything where people would have said, hey, 2021 is a great cycle for Democrats. Yes, they won the
So,
White House, but
so let me make this point. I mean, it's a very good point that you're making, but you know, if you want my argument why Democrats won Georgia seats in 2020, it's because in the runoff, it's because Trump wasn't on the ballot, and so that I think played a huge role. You could argue it's because he refused to concede the election. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I think it probably played a role, but I would actually think it has more to do with more to do with the fact that Democrats had better candidates in Ossoff and Warnock, and Trump was not on the ticket, which I think hurt turnout. Um, but it's a fair counterfactual to make. I guess the point I'm getting at here is that you know look at the presidential race, right? The defund the police argument, the George Floyd protests, all of the cultural stuff. I mean, for God's sakes, Joe Biden like fucking kneeled down on from the White House, I think, or somewhere it was during the Black Lives Matter protests. I mean, these guys were all in with the BLM stuff. It didn't really hurt him. You can't argue it really hurt him that much in the election. He won by a significant margin, 5 points, I think it was,
I
in the popular vote. All I'm saying is I don't know that. I guess the thing I'd say is that yes, maybe it's something to do with the cultural issues, but maybe it's also just due to the fact people didn't like Donald Trump in 2020, and that's why he lost. And they didn't like Joe
well,
Biden in Kamala 24, and that's why they lost.
I agree with that. I'm just simply saying that if you go back and look at the down ballot outcomes of presidential races, 2020 was not as good, and 2024 as well, were not nearly as good for the presidential candidate who won, really, I guess 2016 too, because Democrats picked up Senate seats. We've had three straight cycles where presidential candidates have had almost no coattails at all. Where it seems like the electorate's kind of grudgingly making a determination at the presidential level, not saying, hey, I endorse you wholeheartedly. Let me give you your team and make this work. We have not seen Obama '08, but not even that. We haven't seen Bush 2004. We haven't seen, Clinton 1992. There's not much in the way of coattails. And I'm just saying that, we forget that I think at least most of us going into election night in 2020 thought Democrats were going to pick up significantly more Senate seats than they did, because they dramatically outspent the Republican opponents across the map. And there were races in places, people thought Iowa was going to be competitive, and they ended up losing that Senate race by like 7 points. Um, and so I'm just saying that, we forget that we came out of election night in 2020. Democrats lost, I think, 9 House seats. And if you look at the votes on election night, they got fewer votes in enough seats that would have been, I think, a 52-48 Senate. They picked up in Arizona and Colorado and lost in Alabama, I believe, or something like that. So that's my
Colorado.
only point. Yeah, they won the Colorado seat. They picked up, they beat Cory Gardner in Colorado, and they beat,
That was 2020? That
yeah,
was
and
2020?
yeah, that was the year that Colorado and Alabama canceled each other out because Colorado
Right.
had become a blue state, Alabama was a bright red state, and the incumbent party had no chance. And then I think Democrats won in Arizona, and picked up a seat, and the other two seats were the Georgia specials or runoffs. That's all I'm saying. But I want to talk about before we go, because I know we're running towards the end here. Um, I want to talk about an issue no one's talking about that I think Democrats has been a major, major missed opportunity. And that is the true villain of the Trump administration, in my mind, the biggest villain, even bigger than Stephen
Well,
Miller,
I cannot wait to hear you say that is.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And I'm bringing this up because we got amazing news yesterday, um, about an mRNA cancer vaccine and a trial that it reduced recurrences of melanoma by 50%. And that's a monumental breakthrough. And it's research that RFK Jr. has defunded, mRNA research, and there's scores of other research that he has defunded. And I do not, for the life of me, understand why Democrats haven't leaned in hard on this issue and said, because every American out there is touched by cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's in some way. It's grandma, it's mom, it's beloved siblings, even children, with some of these issues. And RFK is defunding the research that could be life-saving for these people. And I don't understand why it's like it's not even an 80-20 issue, Michael. It's a 100-0 issue.
Can I try to answer that question?
Yes.
Um, I'll tell you how. I'll answer it by pointing out to a poll that just dropped a couple hours ago, American Research Group, which is considered a pretty good pollster. Trump's approval rating is 35% in their latest poll. Disapproval is 63. Um, that's the issue, is that Trump's unpopular. And right now, you can talk about RFK, you talk about mRNA vaccines, but people just want to talk about ICE and Greenland and all the other fakakta stuff that Trump is doing. And so I guess my thing on this is that I don't disagree with anything you just said, and I think in some states there's a useful message. I think, for example, in Georgia, John Ossoff will be focusing on NIH, not NIH, Center CDC, which is headquartered in Atlanta. But I just think, the message is a pretty simple one for Democrats. Donald Trump sucks, and we are not Donald Trump. And I guess I'm not disagreeing with you. Is so much what I'm saying is that there is the dominant issue in American politics is Trump. It
I
always
agree.
has been. And if I were Democrats, this is why I go back to what I said beginning about Ruben Gallego, basically just so diminishing and condescending toward Trump. That is the issue. People don't like Trump. And the more you focus on Trump and the Republicans who are affiliated with Trump, the better off I think you're going to do politically. So it's not that I think you're wrong. I think you're right. And I think in some cases, hold on. I have to sneeze.
I
No, it went back up. So that's all I'm saying. And so, look, let's be clear. It is January 21st, 2026, right? We are 9.5 months until the election. There's plenty of time for Democrats to pick up on these issues, and they will. I think you're right. That's a good issue to run on. I don't know that it's a better issue than running against a Republican who was too close to Trump, or running against Obamacare subsidies going up, or running against what ICE is doing. I guess I go back to what I said earlier, I want to see the polling on this, how much this plays with voters. But I would bet that with most voters, it's about the economy, it's about Trump, and it's about their disappointment with him or their anger toward him. When you have 48% of the country, 48% saying, I strongly disapprove of Donald Trump, that is your issue. That's it.
I to be clear, I see this as an extension to make him even more unpopular. Here's my
Do
theory
you
of
think that really, do
politics.
you think that really makes him more unpopular? I'm not so
So,
sure I agree.
well, here's my theory of politics, Michael. I
Oh,
believe,
wait a minute. We were an hour and 57 minutes in, and now you're talking about your theory of politics. Brian,
yeah,
this should have led the podcast.
I have believed for a long time that the more the issues are easily understandable and that they clearly affect people's lives, where you don't have to connect dots at all, it's obvious to them. Those are the issues that resonate the most in shaping our
But don't
politics.
you have to connect the dots on the RFK issue? I feel like you
Well,
do.
you say Donald Trump is defunding research into Alzheimer's or cancer. That's simple. That's easy to
Yeah,
understand. How
yeah.
many, what percentage of Americans do you think know someone or cares about someone who has cancer or has had cancer? I bet you it's probably 95%. Um, and I just feel like this is something Democrats should have been hammering them on since the Doge stuff last year, because it's just so easily understandable, and people want hope, right? When they have a sick loved one. And Donald Trump is taking that hope away. And to me, it's a very easy messaging thing. And more importantly, Mike,
Sorry,
imagine the
I dropped
ads.
something.
Imagine the ads.
I
What
just
are you
dropped
gonna
the
have?
phone.
You're struggling over there. This is how we know it's almost time to be
Oh
done.
my God.
But
Ugh.
but but
Sorry,
like,
guys.
imagine the ads out there, where you've got cancer patients or diabetics or others talking directly to camera about how their clinical trials were cut off by Donald Trump, where the medicines they need became inaccessible because of Donald Trump. This is the ultimate human issue.
I guess I come from a place that increasingly I believe that policy issues just do not matter. And
See, I don't
ultimately, what
see it as a policy issue. Like, I don't think this is about policy. This is about life and death to people, right? Like,
I just look, I'm not even disagreeing with you. I guess I'm saying if let's say Haley Stevens is the candidate in Michigan and this is a winning message for her, then yeah, she'd run on it. Absolutely. See what the polling says. But I I think Democrats often make a mistake of thinking that issues drive voter decision making, and I think it's much more about vibes and much more about sort of where they think the direction of the country is. And let's face it, you know, 80 to 90% of the country already knows who they're going to vote for in 2026 midterms. I mean, I should say in the presidency, but even in the midterms too. I mean, the country is heavily polarized. We know where most Democrats are going to vote. They're going to vote for Democratic candidate. We know where most Republicans are going to vote. And look, if this is a message that wins over independents, then great, because they're kind of the deciding factor in
you
most
know,
elections. But at the end of the day, like I said before, let 1,000 flowers bloom and let's see what works best for each candidate. I don't disagree. I think it's a good issue for them. I don't think it's a better issue than Obamacare subsidies. I don't think it's a better issue than, cutting Medicaid spending or tax cuts for the rich. I don't think it's a better message than Donald Trump is senile lunatic. I don't think it's a better message than, he's trampling on the Constitution. Although, yeah, it might not be as good an issue. I don't know. I just don't know if it's a good issue. And again, it matters from state to state. If you're running in was a Democrat running for reelection this year. I guess Van Hollen, right? I mean, his message is just going to be Trump sucks, Trump sucks, Trump sucks.
right?
I don't
Well,
know that's going to.
he said he needs to run a campaign. Like,
Yeah, it's
just
true.
the 2-word campaign. Trump sucks. Come
Right,
vote. Like,
exactly. But Mary
but
Peltola, that's not going to work
no,
as well for her,
she's
and so
really
maybe
leaning
this
to
works for
Biff.
her.
It's all about
If I
fish
were Mary
protein.
Patola, I would talk more about fish. I'd talk about the mRNA vaccine. I would.
That's fair. And look, I'm just envisioning the ads. I'm envisioning sympathetic people in ads that run over and over again. And I also think that the huge portion of midterms is getting people to care about midterms and show up.
Yeah, but
And
that's not going to be a problem for Democrats. Jesus. It's not going to be a
no, but
problem.
again, though, look at if we were in a playing field in which we were like 2018, where you had a bunch of Republican sitting ducks who were in Hillary Republican House member districts. Um, or you had a bunch of like purple state, if you had the last cycle, this cycle, in terms of purple state Senate seats up, I think I'd feel exactly the way you do. I'm just thinking, what are the issues that can resonate on a human level in red states and red districts where we can really push the advantage, maybe get to a Senate majority, maybe win some governorships so that they can't gerrymander places, maybe, win an extra 10 House seats so that the majority is more durable. That's where I'm thinking is like, what are those issues where Democrats could speak to red state voters and say, I will make your life better in some way. You should vote for me, even if you might lean right of center, even if you voted for Donald Trump.
Well, but yeah, but that's only going to matter in a couple races. But that's fine. But I just think,
But
again, I mean,
it's
I
not
look
a
at
couple of races. It's all of those ones that Cook has as like likely Republican right now
yeah,
that
but
I think could become
those aren't going to
competitive.
switch.
Sure they are.
Maybe
The district that we were talking about before, Trump plus five,
it's a +5. That should be competitive.
right? But that's in their likely category, likely Republican. That's what I'm saying to you. Is
No,
I
well, that's
think
fair.
in places like that where it's an R plus district, you need to come up with universal issues. And that's what am trying to kind of
Uh,
think of.
all I'm saying, you're right, but I don't know that. Again, I'm not even disagreeing with you much.
You're
I'm saying
cynic. You're a crusty cynic saying issues don't matter at all. And there's a
I
lot of
believe
truth
that.
to that. There is
I
a
don't think
lot
issues.
of truth to that.
I think Democrats make a huge mistake in thinking that issues matter. I think they make a huge mistake in thinking that, and they
And by the
overplay the
way,
importance.
I'm not saying issues matter here because I think issues matter. I'm saying that sympathetic individuals telling their personal story. What was it was the young girl in Steve Bashir's governor ads. Remember
Yeah,
on abortion? Like those kinds of stories resonate because it's not about issues, it's human. And that's
but
what
I
I'm
don't know that
envisioning.
that's why. I don't know that that's why he won. I mean, I guess that we're cherry picking in
Hadley
that race.
Hadley something or another was her
Yes,
name.
she's
I
very
apologize for
brave,
not
very brave young lady
young
who
yeah,
was. I mean, I think she by her stepfather or something. She was. I mean,
awful.
awful story, awful. I guess I'm just cynical. I don't think issues matter all that much. I think the Democrats make a huge mistake thinking they matter. It's like these dipshits who argue like, oh, let's talk about abundance all the time. Like, guess what? That's people don't care, and they're not going to win. You're not going to win votes on that. Yeah, I'm skeptical of these arguments. I think people overcomplicate this stuff, how they think about politics, and I think in the end of the day, the economy and the direction of the country and what they think of the incumbent party, that's what matters the most.
So you're saying you are not endorsing Roger Severino's batshit insane heritage family agenda yesterday that came out like
Uh,
yesterday that
I am
leaked?
not. I am.
Did you see that one
I
before we go?
did. I
It
did, and
it was
I'm not endorsing it.
absolutely utterly insane stuff. Marriage boot camps, tax credits for senior citizens, I guess, who have been married the longest.
Marriage
Um,
boot camps.
additional tax credits for every kid you have over three. It was the most lunatic kind of thing I've ever seen. And it shows you how nuts the right is. So just never forget
They've.
that the nuts are out there and
I
they
agree.
dominate the GOP. By the way,
I
Michael, I
agree.
think we've gotten to a record here. 266
266, I
people
think, is the most
tuned
we've
in
ever had.
live. 267 now.
Yeah. Deb
Tuned in
K just
live.
joined us.
Yeah,
Sorry, Deb. We're about to
unfortunately,
finish
Deb,
up
we're
here.
about done, but we will be
You're 2
back
hours
next week.
late. I mean, good lord, give us a break here.
We will
It's
be
been a
back
long
next week.
day.
One thing that we may have to try is we seem to build as we grow, and I don't know if that's just because we've been on longer or if people are more available later. We may have to try a later time at some point to experiment. But look, we will be back with you next week, unless I am no longer with us because of snow removal. And
Oh, if for those of you who are about to get hit by the snow tsunami,
all of
please be
America.
careful out there.
It's literally going back. I think that Lubbock was like as far west as we were going with this snow map, and then as far
Eesh.
north as like up into New England and down into like Atlanta, and they were talking about northern Mississippi and northern Louisiana.
Crazy.
It
Craziness.
is crazy, and as someone whose snowblower didn't want to start on Monday and spend 3 hours shoveling, I'm not really looking forward to this, especially with like temperatures that don't get out of the teens. The
Agreed.
driveway is long.
Listen,
Yeah,
just be safe out there, people. All
yeah.
right? Be safe. And
Don't shovel if you're not in good shape. Hire
exactly.
someone
Exactly. Hire someone who's in good shape.
and
And we'll
come
be
back and
back.
see us next week.
See us next week. We'll be back next week. Thank you so much, every one of you who's here, for joining us. Always such a pleasure and it's an honor to have some people who come and listen to us pontificate for 2 hours. Um, yeah, thank you. And if you have any questions, any ideas for people you want us to invite to join us, please let us know. And of course, if you have not already, please subscribe to Truth and Consequences and The World According to Brian, which is our two newsletters. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you very much for being here.
Take care.
Have a great week, and just keep your head down because it's tough out there these days. To put it mildly, it is tough out there.
It is definitely tough out there.
Yeah. All
Take
right,
care of
guys.
yourselves.
See you later. Bye bye.
Bye.